Before the video starts, please leave a like and write any comment. Let's try to reach 1,000 comments and 2,000 likes. The channel has taken a hard hit recently, and I truly need your support. If everyone watching leaves one comment and one like, we can reach that goal together. And now, let's begin. I'm a park ranger here in the Northern Cascades. My name is Adahi Nighthawk, which means living in the woods in Cherokee. My family has been on these lands for countless generations, long before they were designated as national parks. I frequently respond to emergencies, search and rescue, and also do some law enforcement work myself. This summer, I was working with a trail crew about 20 miles from the Hoosman campground. The day started like any other. Clear skies, mild temperature, perfect for maintenance work. My crew was clearing fallen trees and repairing washouts from the spring thaw. I dropped back a few hundred yards from the crew to relieve myself, and that's when I noticed a large, sickly sweet odor in the air. It kind of smelled like bear feces, but it was different, more pungent, with an underlying musk that made the hair on my neck stand up. As I stood there, I heard crunching twigs from down the trail, and that's when I saw this large dark figure walking upright in my direction. I turned and began to hide behind a massive Douglas fir. As I turned back to look, it was maybe only about 10 feet away. It was black, a bit shorter than I, no visible neck that I could see. It stopped at the tree I was hiding behind, sniffing the air with its nose pointing up. I could not see any visible eyes. I was rooted to the spot in fear and could not physically move a muscle. It then turned around and walked away casually in the same manner it had arrived. I stood there for a few more minutes to see if it would circle back around and then ran back to my crew. I refused to tell anybody what I had seen. How could I? They'd think I was crazy. That night at the ranger station, I couldn't sleep. My grandmother's stories echoed in my mind. Tales of the Siskets, what white people call Sasquatch or Bigfoot. In Cherokee tradition, we have similar beings, forest giants that roam the wilderness. Grandmother always said they were messengers, warnings of imbalance in the natural world. They appeared when humans had disturbed something sacred. The radio crackled at 5 a.m. Ranger Nighthawk, come in. Over. I grabbed it immediately. Nighthawk here. Over. We've got a situation. Family of 4 reported missing near Twin Falls. Last check-in was yesterday afternoon. They were supposed to camp at Evergreen Point but never arrived. My stomach tightened. Twin Falls was less than 5 miles from where I'd seen the creature. I'll head out immediately. Any details on the family? Over. Parents and 2 children, ages 8 and 11, the Morgans. Father is experienced, been coming to the Cascades for years. Weather report shows rain moving in by noon. Over. Copy that. I'll radio when I reach their last known location. Nighthawk out. I packed my gear methodically. First aid kit, extra water, emergency shelter, flares, GPS, and my sidearm. Standard for search and rescue. But today I added my grandfather's obsidian knife. He'd given it to me before he passed, telling me it had power against entities from the shadow world. I'd always respected our traditions, but never truly needed their protection until now. Dawn broke over the mountains as I drove to the trailhead. The rain arrived early, a fine mist that would soon become a downpour. Perfect weather for losing visibility, for accidents, for disappearances. I parked and checked my map. The Morgans had planned to hike the Cascade Loop, a moderate 12-mile trail that passed by Twin Falls before reaching Evergreen Point. The forest felt different today. I'd spent my life in these woods, knew them like the lines on my palms. But now they seemed watchful, closed. The usual morning birdsong was absent. 3 hours into the search, I found their first campsite. The tent was still there but empty, belongings scattered as if they'd left in a hurry. I radioed in. Base, this is Nighthawk. Found the Morgan family's campsite. Signs of hasty departure. No indication of wildlife disturbance. I'm continuing along the trail toward Twin Falls. Over. Copy, Nighthawk. Backup team is 2 hours behind you. Weather's worsening. Proceed with caution. Over. I searched the area methodically. Nothing seemed overtly wrong, but subtle details bothered me. Their food was stored properly in bear canisters. No signs of animal intrusion. But I found one child's stuffed animal abandoned on a sleeping bag, something no parent would allow if they had time to pack properly. Then I saw it. A single massive footprint at the edge of their campsite, partially obscured by the rain. 18 inches long at least. Too big for any known wildlife in the region. Too distinct to be a bear. My breath caught as I measured it with my hand. I continued along the trail, calling their names every 100 yards. The forest absorbed my voice, sending nothing back but the soft patter of rain on leaves. Near Twin Falls, I found the first real sign of trouble. A child's shoe, size small, abandoned in the middle of the path. And something else, a tuft of dark, coarse hair caught on a branch. Not human, not bear, not any animal I could identify. The falls themselves were swollen with rainwater, thundering down the cliff face with terrible force. And there, across the ravine on a narrow ledge, I saw a flash of red, a child's jacket. I keyed my radio. Base, found possible sign of the missing child near the upper edge of Twin Falls. I'm going to investigate. Over. Nighthawk, wait for backup. That area is unstable even in dry conditions. Over. No time. If that's one of the Morgan children, they're in immediate danger. I'm proceeding with caution. Nighthawk out. I secured my gear and began the treacherous climb. The rocks were slick, the spray from the falls making every handhold a gamble. But I'd climbed these paths since childhood, knew where to find purchase when the casual hiker would see only sheer rock. When I reached the ledge, my heart sank. The red jacket was there, but no child, and it was torn, not by catching on rocks or branches, but by something with claws or incredible strength. Long, deliberate rips through the waterproof material. That's when I heard it, a low, rumbling growl from the cave entrance behind the ledge, a sound that didn't belong to any known predator in these mountains. A sound that vibrated in my chest and turned my blood cold. I slowly turned, drawing my sidearm, knowing it would likely be useless against what waited in the darkness. In the shadows of the cave, two reflective eyes caught what little light penetrated the storm clouds. Eyes too high off the ground to be a mountain lion, too intelligent to be a bear. The same creature I'd encountered the day before was watching me, and somewhere behind it, I feared, was the Morgan family. I stood frozen, rain pelting my face, as those eyes watched me from the cave entrance. My flashlight beam caught nothing but darkness beyond those reflective orbs. A rank odor wafted from the opening, that same sickly sweet smell from yesterday, but stronger, mixed with the unmistakable metallic scent of blood. Hello? I called out, my voice steadier than I felt. Morgan family? Is anyone there? The eyes blinked once, then disappeared deeper into the cave. No growl, no charge, just a deliberate retreat into darkness. I keyed my radio, but got only static. The canyon walls and storm were blocking transmission. I had a choice, wait for backup that might come too late, or follow whatever that thing was into the cave where the Morgans might be. The rain was coming down harder now. If the children were injured and exposed to these conditions, hypothermia would set in quickly. My grandmother's voice seemed to whisper in my ear. Adahi the Saskets fears fire and iron. I pulled out my emergency flare, struck it to life, and stepped into the cave, my grandfather's obsidian knife in my other hand. The passage narrowed immediately, forcing me to crouch. Water dripped from the ceiling, and the stone beneath my feet was worn smooth, as if by centuries of use. This wasn't just a random cave, it was a path, one that had been traveled before. 50 yards in, the tunnel opened into a larger chamber. My flare illuminated ancient pictographs on the walls, human figures, animal forms, and one recurring image, a tall, broad-shouldered being with no neck, arms longer than a man's. The paintings matched descriptions in my people's stories, stories the anthropologist dismissed as myth. A soft whimper echoed from deeper within. Hello? I called again. I'm Ranger Nighthawk. I'm here to help. Help us, came a child's voice, trembling with fear. It took Daddy. I moved forward carefully, sweeping my light across the chamber. There, huddled against the far wall, were three figures, a woman and two children, a boy and a girl. The woman's leg was badly gashed, makeshift bandages soaked through with blood. The children's faces were streaked with dirt and tears. Mrs. Morgan? I approached slowly, holstering my weapon to appear less threatening. She nodded, pulling her children closer. It came to our camp last night. We tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. It took Frank, dragged him away. Her voice broke. We found this cave to hide, but I think it lives here. It keeps coming back. We need to get you out, I said, examining her wound. The gash was deep but had missed major arteries. She could walk with assistance. Can you tell me more about what attacked you? The boy, who couldn't be older than 11, spoke up. It was huge, bigger than Dad, all black and hairy. It didn't make any noise until it was right on top of us. Dad tried to fight it off with his hiking pole, but it snapped it like a twig. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral despite the chill running down my spine. I'm going to help you to the entrance, then go back for your father. He's dead. Mrs. Morgan whispered. No one could survive what that thing did. I didn't argue, but I wasn't leaving anyone behind, dead or alive. Let's focus on getting you three to safety first, as I helped them to their feet. A deep, throaty howl echoed through the cave system. The children froze in terror. It wasn't the same sound I'd heard earlier. This was different, almost like communication. It's calling others, the little girl whispered. There's more than one. My people's stories never mentioned Saskates living in groups. They were always described as solitary creatures. But the old tales also said they were guardians of sacred places, protectors of the land. What if the development in these mountains had driven them together? What if they were protecting something in these caves? We moved as quickly as Mrs. Morgan's injury would allow, following the path back toward daylight. The howl came again, answered by another call from a different direction. The little girl was right. There were at least two of them, communicating, possibly coordinating. 20 yards from the entrance, a massive shadow blocked our path. In the dying light of my flare, I could finally see it clearly. 7 feet tall at least, broad shoulders covered in thick black fur, powerful arms hanging past its knees. Its face was flat, almost simian, with a prominent brow ridge and a wide, lipless mouth. And its eyes, deep-set, intelligent, and unmistakably angry. The Morgan family cowered behind me. I raised my grandfather's obsidian knife, remembering the Cherokee prayers he'd taught me. The creature's gaze fixed on the blade, and it took a step back, nostrils flaring. We're leaving, I said firmly, as if it could understand me. We mean no harm to you or this place. To my astonishment, it tilted its head, studying me. Then its gaze shifted to something on my chest. My tribal pendant, carved from cedar and worn smooth by generations of my family's hands. The creature made a low, rumbling sound, different from its earlier growl, almost contemplative. It stepped sideways, not retreating but clearing enough space for us to pass if we stayed close to the wall. I didn't question this unexpected mercy. Keeping myself between the creature and the Morgans, I guided them past, my eyes never leaving the massive being. As Mrs. Morgan limped by, the creature's nostrils flared again, its attention drawn to her bloody leg. For a terrible moment I thought it might lunge for her, drawn by the scent of blood. Instead, it reached out one massive hand, not toward her but toward the cave wall. Its fingers traced one of the ancient pictographs, a wounded human figure and a larger being that appeared to be helping, not harming. We reached the cave entrance, the storm still raging outside. The ledge would be even more treacherous now, but we had no choice. I helped Mrs. Morgan and the children navigate the narrow path, constantly aware of the creature watching from the shadows of the cave. What about Frank? Mrs. Morgan asked as we reached safer ground. I'm going back for him, I promised. But first I need to get you to safety and call for medical assistance. The girl tugged at my sleeve. It didn't want to hurt us, she said quietly. It was scared too, out of the mouths of babes. Perhaps she was right. Perhaps the creature had been as frightened as they were, reacting to perceived threats. Or perhaps there was something more complex happening in these mountains, something tied to the ancient images in that cave. We made it down to the main trail just as the backup team arrived, 2 rangers and a search and rescue dog. They took charge of the Morgans, radio calling for emergency medical evacuation. Where are you going? My colleague Ranger Peterson asked as I checked my gear. Frank Morgan is still up there. I need to find him. In this weather? With night coming? And after what did that to her leg? No way, Nighthawk. We wait for more backup. I looked back toward the falls, toward the cave where the creature waited. By then it might be too late. I know these mountains better than anyone, and I think I might know what we're dealing with. Peterson followed my gaze. What exactly did the Morgans say attacked them? I chose my words carefully. Something that's been in these mountains a lot longer than we have. Something my people have stories about. His expression told me he understood. Every ranger who worked these woods long enough heard things, saw things they couldn't explain. Most chose to forget, to rationalize. I was choosing to remember, to believe. You've got 2 hours, Peterson said finally. Then I'm coming after you with every ranger in a 50-mile radius. I nodded, secured my radio, and turned back toward the falls, toward the darkness, toward whatever ancient thing waited in the shadows of my ancestors' lands. The rain had eased to a steady drizzle as I climbed back toward the cave. Mist clung to the pines, turning the forest into a ghostly labyrinth. I moved quietly, respectfully, the way my grandfather had taught me to walk these lands. Not as an intruder, but as a guest in an ancient home. Near the cave entrance, I paused. The Morgan family had escaped, but Frank was still missing. The creature, I couldn't think of it as merely a Bigfoot anymore, not after seeing those intelligent eyes, had shown restraint, even mercy. But that didn't mean Frank was still alive. I lit a new flare and stepped into the cave once more. "I've come back," I announced to the darkness. "I'm looking for the man you took. His family is safe." No response came, but I felt the weight of unseen eyes tracking my movement. I followed the main passage deeper than before, past the chamber with the pictographs. The tunnel descended, the air growing colder and damper. Somewhere ahead, water dripped steadily, the sound echoing off stone walls. The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, the ceiling lost in darkness above my flare's reach. And there, in the center, was Frank Morgan, alive but barely conscious, lying on a bed of dried vegetation. His arm was badly broken, bone visible through torn flesh, and dried blood matted his hair. I rushed to him, checking his vital signs. His pulse was weak but steady. "Frank, can you hear me? I'm Ranger Nighthawk. I'm going to get you out of here." His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. They didn't want to hurt us," he whispered. "We disturbed something sacred." "Save your strength," I told him, preparing a temporary splint for his arm. "Your family is safe. They're being taken care of." "No, you don't understand." His voice was urgent despite his weakness. "There's something down here, something old. They're protecting it." A low, rumbling growl echoed through the chamber. I turned slowly, raising my flare. 3 of the creatures stood at the far end of the cavern, the one I'd encountered before, and 2 others. One was noticeably larger, its fur streaked with gray. The third was smaller, perhaps younger. They made no move toward us, but their posture was clear. They were blocking another passage, one that led deeper underground. "What's down there, Frank?" I asked quietly, never taking my eyes off the creatures. "What did you find?" "Bones," he whispered, "but not like any animal I've ever seen. And markings on the walls, symbols. They dragged me here after I tried to photograph them." The largest creature stepped forward, its movements surprisingly graceful for its bulk. In the flare's light, I could see intelligence in its eyes, and something else. Recognition. It studied my face, then my tribal pendant, the same one that had caught the other creature's attention. With deliberate slowness, it raised one massive hand and pointed first to the pendant, then to the passage they guarded. Understanding dawned. "They think I'm here for whatever's down there," I told Frank. They recognized my tribal markings. My grandmother's stories came flooding back. Tales of guardian spirits who protected sacred sites, of ancient pacts between my people and the beings of the deep forest. Stories I dismissed as mere legends meant to keep children from wandering too far. "I need to tend to this man's wounds," I said aloud, addressing the creatures directly. "He needs medical attention. I mean no harm to whatever you're protecting." The largest creature made a series of complex vocalizations, not speech as humans understand it, but clearly communication. It gestured again to the passage, then to me, then made a sweeping motion toward the cave entrance. "I think it's saying I can take you, but I have to come back," I told Frank. I think it's trying to show me something." Frank's eyes widened. "You can't seriously be considering." "My people have stories about these beings," I interrupted. "Stories about ancient agreements, sacred trusts. If I'm right, they're not just animals, they're guardians of something my ancestors knew about." I began carefully moving Frank toward the exit. The creatures watched but made no move to stop us. It was slow going, he was barely conscious, and navigating the narrow passages with his injuries required careful maneuvering. "You know what the craziest part is?" Frank murmured as we neared the cave entrance. "When it first grabbed me, I was terrified. But then it saw my daughter's toy in my pocket. This little stuffed owl Sarah carries everywhere. It stopped. Just stopped. Like it understood." I nodded. "They're not mindless beasts. Whatever they are, they're intelligent. They communicate, they make decisions. Then why attack us at all? You were near whatever they're guarding. Maybe they gave warnings you didn't recognize." Frank was quiet for a moment. "There was a smell before anything happened. And wood knocking sounds all night. We thought it was just hikers." The traditional warnings in all the folklore, scent marking and wood knocking, territorial signals misinterpreted or ignored. We reached the cave entrance as darkness was falling. The storm had passed, leaving a clear night sky scattered with stars. My radio crackled to life. Peterson checking in, warning that my 2-hour window was almost up. "I found Frank Morgan," I reported. "Alive but seriously injured. We're coming down now. Have medical standing by at the trailhead." "Copy that. Do you need assistance with extraction? I glanced back into the cave, sensing the creatures watching from the shadows. Negative. I can manage. Be there in an hour. Getting Frank down the mountain in darkness was challenging, but my knowledge of these trails made it possible. The search and rescue team met us halfway, taking over his care. I gave them a sanitized version of events, found him in a cave where he'd sought shelter after falling down a ravine. No mention of 18-inch footprints or intelligent eyes watching from the darkness. As the medical helicopter lifted off with Frank aboard, Peterson clapped me on the shoulder. Hell of a job, Nighthawk. The family's already at County General. They'll be reunited by morning. I nodded, distracted, my gaze drawn back up the mountain. I need to go back up there. Peterson's expression shifted from congratulatory to concerned. What? Why? We've recovered everyone. I left some equipment, I lied. Need to retrieve it before someone else stumbles across it. He studied my face. This have anything to do with what really happened up there? Because that story about Frank crawling to a cave with a compound fracture and concussion doesn't hold water. I met his gaze steadily. Some things in these mountains are better left undisturbed, Peterson. Some stories aren't meant to be shared beyond those who need to know. Understanding passed between us. The unspoken agreement of those who work in wild places. There are mysteries in the deep woods that don't belong in reports or newspapers. Be careful, was all he said. I waited until the others had departed, then began the climb back up to Twin Falls. Not as a ranger this time, but as Adahi Nighthawk, descendant of Cherokee guardians who had walked these lands for countless generations. Whatever waited in that cave had recognized something in me. Some ancient connection that transcended the modern world I inhabited. It was time to honor that connection, to remember what my people had known but modern society had forgotten. Time to face whatever ancient truth waited in the darkness below. The moon was high when I reached the cave entrance again, bathing the falls in silver light. I stood at the threshold, not with my ranger equipment this time, but with items from my emergency kit that held deeper significance. Sage for purification, tobacco as an offering, and a small cedar carving of a thunderbird my grandfather had made. I've returned, I called into the darkness. Alone, as you asked. For several long minutes nothing happened. Then, from the shadows, the largest of the creatures emerged. In the moonlight I could see it more clearly. The silver streaks in its fur, the scars across its broad chest, the depth of wisdom in its eyes. This was an elder of its kind, a being that had watched these mountains change over decades. Perhaps centuries. It made a low, rumbling sound, then turned and walked deeper into the cave. The invitation was clear. I followed, lighting my way with a small torch rather than the harsh chemical flare. The creature led me past the chamber with the pictographs, past the larger cavern where Frank had been kept, and toward the passage the three beings had been guarding earlier. This new tunnel sloped steeply downward, the air growing noticeably colder. The walls here were different. Not natural cave formation, but worked stone, ancient but clearly shaped by tools. My flashlight revealed more pictographs, but these were different from the ones above, more detailed, more precise. They told a story, one panel flowing into the next. I studied them as we descended. They showed human figures and the Sasquatch-like beings working together, building something, protecting something. The final panel showed a circular object, a disc or wheel of some kind, with intricate patterns carved into it. The passage opened into a chamber unlike anything I'd ever seen. The ceiling soared at least 30 feet high, supported by columns that couldn't possibly be natural, and in the center, set into the stone floor, was a circular platform matching the image from the pictographs, approximately 15 feet in diameter, covered in symbols I didn't recognize. The creature stopped at the edge of this platform, gesturing toward it with one massive hand. I approached cautiously. The platform appeared to be made of a material I couldn't identify. Not quite stone, not quite metal, with an iridescent quality that caught the torchlight. The symbols carved into its surface seemed to shift subtly as I moved, as if alive or responsive to presence. "What is this place?" I whispered, not expecting an answer. To my shock, a voice responded, not from the creature, but from deeper in the shadows of the chamber. "Your ancestors called it the gateway." I spun around, torch raised. An elderly man stepped into the light, dressed in worn hiking clothes that had seen better days. His white hair was pulled back in a long braid, his copper skin deeply lined with age. Around his neck hung a pendant identical to mine. "Who are you?" I demanded, hand instinctively moving to my sidearm. "My name is Joseph Blackfeather, Cherokee like you." He gestured to my pendant. Though my clan has been guardians here much longer than most remember, the creature made no move to interfere, watching our interaction with those intelligent, assessing eyes. "How long have you been here?" I asked, taking in his appearance. The worn but serviceable clothing, the knife at his belt that looked handmade, the calm acceptance of the massive being standing near us. 43 years, he said matter-of-factly, since I discovered what the development companies were planning for this valley. Since I remembered the old stories and knew someone had to maintain the covenant. What covenant? Joseph approached the platform, kneeling to trace one of the symbols with weathered fingers. Long before Europeans came, our people made an agreement with the Saskets. They would guard this place, this gateway, and we would ensure humans never disturbed it. For generations, our shamans would visit, renew the protections, maintain the balance. Gateway to what? He looked up, his dark eyes reflecting the torchlight. The old stories say it's a doorway between worlds, or perhaps times. The elders weren't entirely clear, and perhaps they didn't fully understand themselves. What matters is that it must remain sealed, and the guardians must remain undisturbed. I glanced at the creature, the guardian, still watching us with unblinking attention. But the development, the tourists, the hikers, Joseph nodded grimly. The old ways were forgotten, the covenant broken. Few remembered the stories as anything but myths. I was a park ranger too, many years ago. When I found this place, I knew I couldn't let it be destroyed. So I stayed, became a guardian myself. You've been living in these caves for 4 decades? I couldn't keep the disbelief from my voice. Not always in the caves. I have a cabin, well hidden. I come and go as needed, keeping hikers away from this area when possible. He gestured to the massive being. They tolerate my presence because they recognize the pendant, the bloodline. They know I'm here to help. And the Morgans? Joseph's expression darkened. They camped too close. The father, Frank, was documenting everything, taking photos, samples. He found one of the smaller cave entrances and started exploring. The guardians had no choice but to intervene. The creature made a series of vocalizations, and to my amazement, Joseph responded with similar sounds. Not identical, but clearly an attempt at communication. "You speak their language?" I asked. "Not exactly, but after decades we've developed understanding, enough to communicate basic needs and intentions." He turned back to me. "They're worried. More humans come each year. The sacred sites are being discovered, documented. They can't protect the gateway if they're being hunted, studied, exposed." I thought of the numerous Bigfoot expeditions that came through these mountains, the tourist hoping for a glimpse of a legend. What do they want from me? They recognized your pendant, your bloodline. They want the covenant renewed. They want someone on the inside, someone who works for the Park Service to help protect this place. By doing what? I can't exactly close off parts of a national park because of an ancient agreement with Sasquatch. Joseph smiled faintly. That's exactly what I said, 43 years ago. But there are ways. Trail maintenance that never quite gets completed in certain areas. Reports of unstable conditions near cave systems, warning signs about rock slides or predator activity, small discouragements that add up, that keep most people away from the most sensitive areas. The creature, the guardian, approached, moving with surprising grace for its bulk. It stopped a few feet away, then slowly extended one massive hand, palm up, toward me. "He's asking for your decision," Joseph said quietly. "Will you help maintain the covenant? Will you help protect the gateway?" I looked from the ancient platform to the waiting guardian to the old man who had given up his former life to honor a promise made generations before he was born. I thought of my grandmother's stories, dismissed as mere myth until now. I thought of the Morgan family, who had nearly died because they didn't understand what they were disturbing. Slowly, I removed my pendant and placed it in the guardian's enormous palm. Its fingers closed gently around the carved cedar. Then it returned the pendant to me with a solemn nod. "What exactly am I agreeing to?" I asked Joseph. "To remember, to watch, to warn others away when necessary, and perhaps, when I'm gone, to take my place." The guardian made a deep, rumbling sound that resonated in my chest. Not threatening, but powerful. A pact being sealed. "I'll need to know everything," I told Joseph. "About the gateway, about the guardians, about how you've managed all these years." He nodded. "There's time for that. But first there's a ritual we must complete to renew the covenant properly." As Joseph began gathering materials from niches in the chamber walls, I realized my life had irrevocably changed. I had stepped from the world of ranger reports and trail maintenance into something far older, far more profound. Like my ancestors before me, I had answered a call I hadn't known I was waiting to hear. Under the watchful eyes of the guardians, in a chamber older than written history, I prepared to bind myself to an ancient promise, to protect a mystery I didn't fully understand, but instinctively knew must be preserved. 6 months have passed since that night in the cavern beneath Twin Falls. 6 months of living between two worlds, the mundane reality of park ranger duties, and the hidden truth of what lies beneath these mountains. Joseph Blackfeather has become my teacher, sharing knowledge passed down through generations of Cherokee guardians. Each week, I make the journey to his hidden cabin, where he instructs me in the old ways, how to communicate with the Saskets, how to read the ancient symbols, how to maintain the energetic seals around the gateway. The Morgans recovered from their ordeal. The official report states they were attacked by a bear, became separated, and sought shelter in different cave systems. Frank's photographs were damaged beyond recovery in the incident, a convenient story he seems content to maintain. When I visited them in the hospital, something in his eyes told me he understood the need for silence. Some truths are too profound, too disruptive to share. My colleagues have noticed changes in me. A new seriousness, a deeper connection to the land I patrol. Peterson sometimes gives me odd looks when I redirect hiking groups away from certain areas, but he doesn't question my methods. There's an unspoken respect among those who work in wild places. Some mysteries are meant to remain mysteries. Today, I'm hiking to one of the more remote monitoring stations Joseph has established over the decades. These simple arrangements of stones and carved symbols help us track the Guardian's movements and alert us to any disturbances near the gateway. The autumn air is crisp, leaves crunching beneath my boots as I follow game trails no tourist would notice. I sense the Guardian before I see it, that distinctive prickling at the base of my neck that I've come to recognize. Stopping, I remove my hat and wait, showing respect. The younger Guardian emerges from the tree line, moving with the silent grace that still astonishes me. In daylight, its fur has reddish undertones I never noticed during our first encounters. According to Joseph, this one is female, perhaps 30 years old. Young for their kind, which can live well over a century. I make the gestures Joseph taught me. Right hand to heart, then open palm extended. Recognition, then peace. She responds with a similar motion, then approaches, stopping a respectful distance away. From a pouch-like fold of skin at her waist, she produces something and extends it toward me. A carved stone, smooth and black, with one of the gateway symbols etched into its surface. Thank you, I say, accepting the gift. Joseph has explained that they create these marker stones to help monitor the gateway's energies. This is the first time one of them has given me such a token directly, a sign of growing trust. She makes a series of soft, clicking vocalizations, then points toward the northeast, toward the area where a new hiking trail has been proposed. I understand, I tell her. I'll make sure it's rerouted. No one will come near the sacred sites. She watches me for a long moment with those deep, intelligent eyes, then nods once. A gesture they've learned from observing humans. Before melting back into the forest with barely a sound, I continue to the monitoring station, adding the carved stone to the arrangement. Joseph has taught me how to read these stations, how the position of certain stones indicates areas the Guardians are concerned about, how specific symbols relate to the gateway's stability. Today's configuration suggests increased activity, more hikers straying off established trails, more curiosity seekers venturing into restricted areas. The summer tourism season may be over, but social media has made these mountains a year-round destination for those seeking the unexplained. My radio crackles. Nighthawk, come in, over. Nighthawk here, over. We've got a situation at Lookout Ridge, group of 8, calling themselves Sasquatch Seekers of Seattle. They've set up unauthorized camera traps and sound equipment. Peterson's headed there now, but thought you might want to join him, over. My heart sinks. Lookout Ridge is less than 3 miles from one of the secondary cave entrances. Copy that, I'm en route, ETA 40 minutes, Nighthawk out. This is becoming more frequent. Amateur cryptozoologists, YouTube documentarians, thrill seekers with drones and night vision equipment. Each incident requires careful management, confiscation of equipment, citations for permit violations, and most importantly, ensuring they leave with nothing more substantial than frustrated ambitions. Sometimes I wonder if Joseph's approach is still viable in the age of satellite imagery and thermal drones. Then I remember the ancient power I felt emanating from the gateway, the solemn intelligence in the Guardian's eyes, and I know some secrets still have their own protections. Forces modern technology cannot easily penetrate or explain away. By the time I reach Lookout Ridge, Peterson has the situation well in hand. Equipment confiscated, citations issued, 8 disgruntled Sasquatch enthusiasts packing up their campsite. They had quite the operation, Peterson tells me, nodding toward the pile of gear. Motion sensors, audio recorders set to capture infrasound, automated cameras with satellite uplinks. Told them they needed wilderness activity permits, environmental impact studies, and tribal consultation before installing any of this. Good call, I say, examining one of the cameras, high-end equipment capable of operating for weeks on a single battery charge. Did they get anything? Peterson smirks. They claim they recorded distinctive vocalizations last night, but when we reviewed the audio, it was clearly coyotes. Amateur hour. He pauses, studying my face. You've been spending a lot of time in this sector lately. Any particular reason? I choose my words carefully. Just being thorough. There have been some unusual wildlife patterns I'm monitoring. Unusual wildlife, he repeats, his expression neutral but his eyes knowing. Like that bear that supposedly attacked the Morgans but left no claw marks, just clean breaks and contusions. I meet his gaze steadily. These mountains have their secrets, Peterson. Always have. He nods slowly. My grandfather was Nez Perce. He had stories about these forests, things that walked between the worlds, guardians of sacred places. He adjusts his hat. Always thought they were just stories to keep kids from wandering off alone. Sometimes stories exist for a reason. Peterson hands me a memory card. This was in one of their cameras pointed toward the northeastern ridge. Might want to review it before I submit it with the confiscated equipment. The gesture speaks volumes. Pedersen suspects something, maybe even knows more than he lets on, and he's offering me a chance to protect whatever secrets need protecting. Appreciated, I say, pocketing the card. That evening, in the privacy of my cabin, I review the footage. Most of it shows nothing but wind-stirred branches and occasional wildlife, deer, a fox, birds. But at 3:17 a.m., there's a brief shadow at the edge of the frame, large, upright, moving with purpose. Not clear enough to confirm anything to a skeptic, but enough to fuel the believer's convictions. I delete the file, then place the memory card in the fireplace, watching as the plastic warps and melts. One more piece of evidence consigned to the realm of rumor and speculation, where it belongs, where it's safer for everyone. Later that night, I drive to Joseph's cabin for our weekly meeting. He's waiting on the porch, a knowing look on his weathered face. The Sasquatch Seekers of Seattle, he says with a wry smile. I heard them setting up yesterday. Clumsy, loud. The Guardians were watching them the entire time. I handled it, I assure him. Pedersen helped. I think he suspects something, but he's choosing not to ask too many questions. Joseph nods. There are always allies if you know how to recognize them. People who understand that some mysteries should remain mysterious. He gestures for me to follow him inside. Come, tonight we need to discuss the winter preparations. The gateway energies shift with the solstice, and the Guardians will need our help to maintain the seals. As I follow him into the warmth of his cabin, I reflect on the path that brought me here. 6 months ago, I was just a park ranger with Cherokee ancestry, proud of my heritage, but disconnected from its deeper meanings. Now I stand with one foot in the modern world, and one in an ancient covenant older than written history. The Saskets, the Guardians, aren't the monsters of campfire tales or the prizes sought by cryptozoologists. They're intelligent beings fulfilling a purpose that transcends human understanding, protecting something that must remain protected for reasons my ancestors understood better than I yet do. And now I'm one of them, a guardian of the pines, a keeper of ancient truths, a bridge between worlds that must remain separate. The forest has always been my home, but now it's also my sacred trust. As Joseph lays out the stone markers on his table, preparing to teach me the winter rituals, I feel the weight of generations watching, my grandmother who told me the stories, my grandfather who gave me the obsidian knife, countless ancestors who kept this covenant in ways large and small. In the distance, a wood-knocking sound echoes through the trees, the Guardians, communicating, patrolling, fulfilling their ancient purpose beneath the shadows of the pines. I answer with a knock of my own, a promise renewed, a covenant honored. The secrets of these mountains are safe with me. Rive! The static of my radio pulled me from a dreamless sleep. Another day in paradise, as we ironically called it. The northern Cascades stretched in every direction, beautiful and unforgiving. 6 years as a ranger here, and I still found myself in awe of these mountains. They commanded respect. I rolled out of my bunk at the Ridge Station outpost, muscles aching from yesterday's 12-mile hike. The coffee pot gurgled in the corner. Martinez had already been up. Good man. I poured myself a cup of the black sludge and checked the day's assignments. Trail maintenance with a 5-person crew, about 20 miles from Hoosman Campground. Simple enough. Morning, Lawson, Martinez said, entering the station kitchen with a clipboard. Ready for another exciting day of clearing fallen trees? I grunted in response, the coffee still working its way through my system. Any updates from dispatch? Nothing major. Couple of hikers reported seeing a bear near Wilson Creek, but they were probably just spooked by a moose. You know how tourists are. I nodded. It happened all the time, people from the city seeing shadows and turning them into monsters. But that was our job, search and rescue, wildlife management, and sometimes law enforcement when someone decided the rules didn't apply to them. Martinez tossed me a granola bar. Crews meeting at 0800. Thompson wants to get an early start before the heat kicks in. Thompson's leading today? Yeah, Reed called in sick. Something about food poisoning from that diner in town. Reed's absence made me uneasy. He was the most experienced among us when it came to trail management, and he knew these woods better than anyone. Still, Thompson was capable enough. We'd be fine. The crew loaded up at the trailhead by 8:15. Thompson, Martinez, Chen, Dawkins, and me. 5 rangers, 2 chainsaws, and enough supplies for a day's work. The trail needed clearing after last week's windstorm had knocked down several trees. Lawson, you take the rear, Thompson ordered. Keep an eye out for stragglers. I nodded, shouldering my pack. Taking the rear position meant I'd be the last one in line as we hiked to our worksite. It was usually uneventful, but I didn't mind. I preferred the quiet. The morning passed quickly. We reached the first fallen tree by 10 a.m., a massive pine that had toppled across the trail. Thompson and Chen fired up the chainsaws while Dawkins and Martinez handled the smaller branches. I kept watch, making notes of other trail issues we'd need to address. By midday, we'd cleared 3 blockages and were making good time. The forest hummed with life around us. Birds calling, squirrels chattering, the occasional rustle of larger animals moving through the underbrush. Let's break for lunch, Thompson called, shutting down his chainsaw. 30 minutes, then we push on to the next section. We scattered slightly, finding comfortable spots to sit and eat. I wandered about 50 yards down the trail, wanting some space. The packed lunch, a sandwich, apple and trail mix, was nothing special, but it would keep me going. As I ate, I watched a hawk circle overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. After finishing my sandwich, I realized I needed to relieve myself. Heading back a bit, I called to Martinez, who was nearest. Nature calls. He waved acknowledgement, and I walked a few hundred yards back down the trail, looking for a suitable spot off the path. Finding a thick stand of trees, I stepped between them for privacy. That's when I first noticed the smell. It hit me suddenly, a sickly sweet odor hanging in the air. My first thought was bear feces, but this was different. Stronger, ranker, almost like rotting meat, but with an underlying muskiness I couldn't place. In 16 years of wilderness work, I'd never encountered anything quite like it. I finished my business quickly, suddenly eager to rejoin the group. As I zipped up, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of twigs crunching underfoot. Not the light steps of a squirrel or rabbit. These were heavy, deliberate footfalls. Something big was moving down the trail toward me. Instinctively, I stepped behind a large cedar, making myself as small as possible. The footsteps continued, slow and measured. I held my breath, listening as they drew closer. Curiosity got the better of me. I risked a glance around the tree. What I saw froze the blood in my veins. A dark figure was walking upright along the trail. It moved with an awkward yet purposeful gait. It was maybe 7 feet tall, covered in what looked like black fur or hide. The smell grew stronger as it approached. I ducked back behind the tree, pressing myself against the rough bark. My heart hammered so loudly I was certain the creature would hear it. I waited, scarcely breathing, as the footsteps drew level with my hiding place. They stopped. I could sense it standing there, just on the other side of the cedar. The smell was overwhelming now. I heard a snuffling sound. It was sniffing the air, its unseen nose pointed upward. I couldn't see its face from my position, but I could feel its presence. It stood there for what felt like an eternity, though it was probably only seconds. I remained frozen, unable to move a muscle, terror locking my joints in place. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, the creature turned and walked away. Its footsteps receded down the trail, in the direction from which I'd come. Away from my crew, I stayed hidden for several minutes, ensuring it wouldn't return. When I finally found the courage to move, my legs nearly buckled beneath me. Sweat drenched my uniform despite the cool mountain air. I ran back to the crew, my mind racing. What had I just seen? A bear walking on its hind legs? No, its proportions were all wrong. A person in some kind of costume? Out here, miles from civilization? Impossible. You okay, Lawson? Thompson asked when I rejoined them. You look like you've seen a ghost. I forced a laugh. Yeah, just thought I heard something. Probably nothing. I couldn't bring myself to tell them. Who would believe me? More importantly, what if they insisted on investigating? I couldn't risk leading them toward that thing. For the rest of the day, I worked mechanically, my mind elsewhere. Every rustle in the undergrowth made me jump. Every shadow seemed to move, and all the while I kept scanning the trees, certain we were being watched. By the time we headed back to the trailhead, darkness was falling. The forest took on an ominous quality in the fading light, familiar landmarks transforming into looming silhouettes. I kept to the middle of the group on the return journey, no longer comfortable bringing up the rear. That night, sleep eluded me. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark figure moving with its unnatural gait through the trees. I told myself I'd imagined it, that stress and isolation had played tricks on my mind, but I knew better. Something was out there in my forest, something I couldn't explain, and I had a sinking feeling I would encounter it again. 3 days passed before I could bring myself to speak about what I'd seen. Not to my crew, I still couldn't face their skepticism, but to someone who might understand. Carlos Vasquez had been a ranger in these parts for nearly 30 years before retiring to a cabin on the edge of the national forest. If anyone knew the secrets of these mountains, it was him. I drove out to his place after my shift, following the winding dirt road that led to his isolated homestead. His cabin sat nestled among tall pines, smoke curling from the chimney despite the summer heat. Didn't expect visitors, he said when he answered my knock, his weathered face breaking into a smile. Come in, Lawson. His cabin was cluttered but comfortable, the walls lined with bookshelves and mounted specimens, the skulls of deer, elk, and bear. A fire crackled in the stone hearth, and a pot of something savory simmered on the wood stove. Coffee? He offered, already reaching for a second mug. Thanks. I settled into an armchair, trying to organize my thoughts. How to begin? I saw something in the woods 3 days ago. Something I can't explain. Carlos paused, the coffee pot suspended midair. What kind of something? I described the encounter in detail. The smell, the dark figure, its height and movement, the way it had sniffed the air. As I spoke, Carlos's expression changed from curiosity to concern. Where exactly was this, he asked when I finished. About 20 miles east of Hoosman, along the old logging trail. He nodded slowly, returning to his chair with our coffees. You're not the first, you know. A chill ran through me. What do you mean? These mountains keep their secrets, he said, staring into the fire. But sometimes, they reveal themselves to those who spend enough time here. Carlos, please, no cryptic bullshit. What did I see? He sighed heavily. The Blackwood people, the tribe that lived here before European settlement, they had stories. They called it the Shadow Walker, a creature that guarded the deepest parts of the forest. You're talking about folklore, I said, disappointment creeping in. I saw something real. I'm not saying it isn't real. Carlos leaned forward. In '87, I was working a search and rescue operation. College kid went missing on a solo hike. We found him 3 days later, curled up in a ravine, barely coherent. He kept talking about a black figure that had followed him for miles. I felt the hair on my arms stand on end. What happened to him, officially? Exposure and dehydration caused hallucinations. Unofficially, Carlos shrugged. He wasn't the same afterward, moved away last I heard. Have you ever seen it yourself? He was quiet for a long moment. Once, winter of '92, heavy snowfall had us checking the backcountry cabins for stranded hikers. I was alone coming back from the Eastridge shelter when I smelled it, like you described. Sweet but rotten. I leaned forward, hanging on his every word. I saw it moving through the trees just at dusk. Thought it was a bear at first, but... He shook his head. No bear moves like that. I radioed it in as a possible wildlife sighting and got out of there fast. Never mentioned it again. Why not? Because some things in these mountains are better left alone, Lawson. His eyes met mine, deadly serious. The Ranger's service doesn't acknowledge what can't be explained. You start talking about monsters in the woods, they'll have you behind a desk faster than you can blink. Or worse, sent for psychological evaluation. I knew he was right. Even now, part of me wanted to dismiss the encounter as a bear or a stress-induced hallucination. But I knew what I'd seen, so what do I do? Be vigilant, carry bear spray. Might work, might not, but it's better than nothing. And don't go out alone if you can help it. He took a sip of coffee. Most importantly, trust your instincts. If something feels wrong, it probably is. I left Carlos's cabin with more questions than answers, but at least I knew I wasn't alone in what I'd experienced. Others had seen the creature before me. That knowledge was both comforting and terrifying. The following week passed uneventfully. I threw myself into my work, taking on extra shifts to keep busy. The encounter began to feel distant, dreamlike. Perhaps it had been nothing more than a strange bear after all. Then the reports started coming in. First, it was a group of hikers claiming they'd been stalked by something on the North Ridge Trail. They described hearing footsteps following them for miles, though they never saw anything. They'd cut their trip short, too spooked to continue. Next, a family at Hoosman Campground reported strange noises outside their tent in the middle of the night. Not the typical sounds of raccoons or deer, but heavy breathing and what they described as almost words but not quite. When they shone a flashlight outside, they saw nothing, but found strange, large footprints in the mud the next morning. Each report sent a jolt of recognition through me. I volunteered to follow up on both incidents, collecting statements and checking the areas. The footprints at Hoosman had been mostly washed away by rain, but what remained didn't match any animal I recognized. They were too large for a bear, too wide for a human. I didn't share my findings with the rest of the staff. Instead, I started my own investigation, marking each reported sighting on my personal map of the region. A pattern began to emerge. Most encounters occurred within a 10-mile radius of Blackwood Ridge, an area rarely visited by tourists due to its rugged terrain. That's where I needed to go. I requested a 2-day patrol of the Blackwood Ridge area, citing reports of illegal camping. My supervisor approved it without question. Budget cuts meant we were all taking on extra patrols anyway. The night before my departure, I barely slept. Anticipation and dread battled within me. Was I really going to seek out this creature deliberately? What would I do if I found it? I had no plan beyond confirmation. I needed to know, once and for all, what was out there. At dawn, I packed my gear, standard patrol equipment, plus extra rations, a more powerful flashlight, a camera, and bear spray. I told Martinez I'd be checking the ridge for the next 2 days and would radio in at the scheduled times. "Be careful up there," he said. "Storm's supposed to be moving in tomorrow evening. I'll be back before then," I promised. As I set out along the trail that would take me to Blackwood Ridge, the forest seemed to close in around me. Birds called in the canopy above, and sunlight filtered through the leaves, creating shifting patterns on the ground. Yet despite the beauty, I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every so often I would stop and listen, certain I'd heard footsteps behind me. Each time I was met with only the natural sounds of the forest, but as I ventured deeper into the wilderness, those natural sounds began to change. The bird song grew less frequent, then stopped altogether. The rustle of small animals in the underbrush faded to silence. By midday, the forest had grown unnaturally quiet. I'd hiked these mountains for years and never experienced such stillness. It was as though the wildlife had vanished, or was hiding. I checked my map. I was approaching the area where most of the sightings had been reported. My heart rate quickened, and I found myself scanning the trees more frequently, jumping at shadows. That's when I caught it again. That distinctive, sickly sweet smell, faint at first, then growing stronger. I wasn't alone on Blackwood Ridge. Something was watching me, and this time, I was determined to see it clearly. The smell grew stronger as I pushed deeper into Blackwood Ridge. I moved carefully, stepping lightly to minimize noise. Every few minutes I would stop and listen, trying to detect any sound that didn't belong. Around mid-afternoon I reached a small clearing. Ancient trees ringed the space, their massive trunks gnarled and twisted with age. In the center stood a weathered stone formation, not quite a cairn, but clearly arranged by human hands long ago. The air felt different here, heavier. The silence was absolute, not even the whisper of wind through leaves. I approached the stone formation, noting strange markings carved into some of the rocks. They resembled no symbols I recognized, not native petroglyphs, not modern graffiti. As I leaned in to examine them more closely, a twig snapped in the forest behind me. I whirled around, hand instinctively going to my sidearm. Nothing moved among the trees, but the feeling of being watched intensified. The sickly sweet odor hung thick in the air. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded small and vulnerable in the oppressive silence. No response came, but I could have sworn I heard a faint exhalation, like a sigh, or perhaps a suppressed growl. "Park Ranger," I announced, trying to project authority I didn't feel. "Identify yourself." Again, nothing. But the sensation of being observed didn't fade. I decided to continue on, following a faint game trail that led away from the clearing. The path wound through increasingly dense forest, the trees growing so close together in places that I had to turn sideways to pass between them. After about a mile, the trail opened onto a ravine. A small stream cut through the bottom, the water running clear over smooth stones. I paused to refill my canteen, using purification tablets to make it safe for drinking. As I knelt by the water, I saw it, a reflection in the stream's surface, something dark moving on the ridge above me. I looked up sharply, but whatever it was had already disappeared. Heart pounding, I scrambled up the bank, trying to get a better view of the ridge. Nothing but trees and rocks greeted me. But then I spotted them. Footprints. Large, distinctly not human, pressing deep into the soft earth near the stream's edge. They led away from the water, heading deeper into the forest. Without hesitation, I began to follow them. The rational part of my mind screamed that this was foolish. I was alone, miles from backup, tracking something unknown. But my need for answers overrode caution. The tracks were fresh, the edges still sharp in the damp soil. Whatever had made them couldn't be far ahead. I moved as quietly as possible, stopping frequently to listen and check my surroundings. The forest grew darker as clouds rolled in, obscuring the sun. The temperature dropped noticeably, and the first distant rumble of thunder reached my ears. The storm was moving in faster than forecast. I should turn back, make camp somewhere sheltered, and continue in the morning. But the tracks were too fresh, the mystery too compelling. I pressed on, following the trail as it wound through a stand of ancient hemlocks. The footprints led to the base of a sheer rock face that rose about 30 feet before leveling off into another section of forest. The tracks simply stopped at the wall of rock. I examined the cliff face, looking for handholds or signs of climbing, but found none. It was as if whatever I was tracking had simply vanished, or had scaled the vertical surface with ease. A flash of lightning illuminated the forest, followed seconds later by a crash of thunder. Fat raindrops began to fall, quickly turning into a downpour. I needed shelter, and fast. About 50 yards to my right, I spotted a dark opening in the rock face, a small cave or overhang. I hurried toward it, pulling my rain gear tighter around me as the storm intensified. The opening led to a shallow cave, just deep enough to provide shelter from the rain. I shrugged off my pack and took out my flashlight, examining the space. It extended back about 15 feet before narrowing into what appeared to be a tunnel. Old ashes in a crude fire ring suggested others had used this place for shelter before. I set up a small camp, laying out my sleeping bag and lighting a portable stove to heat water for coffee. The storm raged outside, lightning flashing at increasingly frequent intervals. I was glad to have found shelter, even if it delayed my search. As I sipped my coffee, I noticed something on the cave wall. More of those strange symbols, similar to the ones I'd seen on the stones in the clearing. These were carved directly into the rock, their edges softened by time. I ran my fingers over them, wondering at their age and meaning. Some seemed to depict stick figures, others geometric patterns that made no immediate sense. The storm showed no signs of abating. I decided to get some rest and continue my search at first light. After securing my gear and making sure my radio was within reach, I settled into my sleeping bag. Sleep came fitfully, punctuated by dreams of being pursued through endless forest by a shapeless black figure. Each time I woke, the storm still thundered outside, rain lashing the cave entrance. During one such awakening, bleary-eyed and disoriented, I became aware of a sound beneath the storm's fury, a rhythmic scraping coming from the narrow tunnel at the back of the cave. I lay perfectly still, straining to hear. There it was again. Scrape, scrape, pause. Scrape, scrape, pause. Like claws or nails dragging across stone. Slowly, I reached for my flashlight, keeping my movements minimal. The scraping continued, seemingly unaware of my presence. With trembling fingers, I switched on the light, aiming its beam toward the tunnel. The passageway remained dark, too deep for my light to penetrate fully. But the scraping stopped abruptly. For several long moments, nothing happened. Then, from the darkness of the tunnel came a sound that turned my blood to ice, a low, rumbling growl, unlike any animal I'd ever heard. It contained notes that seemed almost linguistic, as though whatever made it was trying to form words. I sat up slowly, never taking my eyes off the tunnel entrance. My hand found the bear spray, though I doubted it would be effective against whatever lurked in the darkness. "I'm armed," I called out, my voice steadier than I expected. "Identify yourself." The growl came again, louder this time. Then silence. I kept the light trained on the tunnel, every muscle tense, ready to flee if necessary. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the only sounds the storm outside and my own ragged breathing. Then, just as I'd begun to think the creature had retreated, something emerged from the tunnel. First a hand, if you could call it that. Long, black fingers with curved claws gripped the edge of the opening. Then came an arm, covered in coarse, dark fur or hide. I scrambled backward, pressing myself against the cave wall, bear spray raised. "Stay back," I shouted. The creature paused, its arm and hand the only parts visible. Then, slowly, it began to withdraw, sliding back into the darkness of the tunnel until it vanished completely. I didn't sleep again that night. I kept the flashlight on, trained on the tunnel entrance, my back to the cave wall. The scraping sounds did not return, but several times I thought I heard breathing from deep within the passage. When dawn finally broke, the storm had passed. Sunlight filtered into the cave entrance, bringing with it a false sense of security. I packed my gear quickly, eager to be away from this place. Before leaving, I examined the tunnel entrance more carefully in the daylight. The passage sloped downward, disappearing into darkness. Around its mouth were more of the strange symbols, these more clearly depicting humanoid figures with elongated limbs. I took several photos, both of the tunnel and the symbols, then hurried out of the cave. The forest was damp and misty after the storm, the air fresh and clean. No trace remained of the sickly sweet odor that had permeated the area the day before. I checked my map, plotting the quickest route back to the ranger station. I had seen enough, more than enough. Whatever was out there, it was real. I had evidence now, the footprints, the photos of the symbols, my own encounter in the cave. As I headed back down the trail, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being followed. Every few minutes I would stop and look back, seeing nothing but silent trees. It wasn't until I reached the edge of Blackwood Ridge, where the forest began to thin, that the sensation finally faded. I quickened my pace, eager to reach the relative safety of the main trail. By late afternoon, exhausted and muddy, I arrived back at the ranger station. Martinez looked up in surprise as I entered. "Lawson, thought you weren't due back until tomorrow?" "Change of plans," I said, dropping my pack. Storm moved in faster than expected. He nodded, accepting the explanation without question. "Find any illegal campers?" "No," I replied. "But I found something else. Something I need to show you." Martinez followed me to the small conference room at the back of the ranger station. I closed the door behind us, ensuring privacy before spreading out my findings on the table. "What's this about, Lawson?" he asked, eyeing the mud-spattered maps and my camera. "I need you to look at these with an open mind," I said, connecting my camera to the laptop. "What I'm about to show you, it's going to sound crazy." Martinez leaned back, arms crossed. "Try me." I pulled up the photos first. The strange stone formation in the clearing, the symbols carved into the rocks, the cave entrance with its ominous tunnel, and finally, the footprints by the stream. As Martinez examined each image, his expression shifted from skeptical to concerned. "These footprints," he said, zooming in on one photo. "They're not bare, not human. What made these? That's what I've been trying to figure out." I unfolded my map, showing him the marked locations of reported sightings. "These aren't isolated incidents. There's been at least 7 reports in the past month alone." Martinez studied the map, all clustered around Blackwood Ridge. "Exactly. And that's where I saw it again." His head snapped up. "Again?" I took a deep breath and told him everything. My first encounter 3 weeks ago, my conversation with Carlos Vasquez, and finally what happened in the cave. When I finished, Martinez was silent for a long moment. I expected disbelief, perhaps even ridicule, but his expression remained serious. "You know how this sounds," he finally said. "I do. That's why I needed evidence before bringing it to anyone." He nodded slowly. "I've been a ranger for 12 years, Lawson. Most of that time, I would have dismissed this without a second thought." He paused. "But last winter, I was doing a night patrol near Echo Lake, saw something moving through the trees, thought it was a bear, but..." "But?" I prompted when he trailed off. "It was walking upright, and the way it moved..." He shook his head. I told myself it was just shadows and poor visibility, filed it away as a weird experience, and moved on. Relief washed over me. "So you believe me?" "I believe you saw something," he clarified. "What exactly it was, I'm not ready to say. But these footprints, these symbols, they're real. The question is, what do we do with this information?" It was a good question. Standard protocol would have us report unusual wildlife sightings to the regional office, but this was beyond unusual. Without concrete evidence, a clear photograph of the creature itself, or biological samples, we risked being dismissed or worse. "We need more," I said finally. Solid evidence that can't be explained away, and we need to know if this thing poses a danger to people in the park. Martinez considered this. The increased sightings concern me. If it's becoming more active, more visible, exactly. Whatever it is, it seems to be expanding its territory, or at least its willingness to be seen. We agreed to keep our investigation between us for now. Martinez would discreetly gather information on any new sightings or unusual reports, while I would research the symbols we'd found, starting with the tribal historical archives in the town library. The next morning, I drove into the small town of Pinecrest, about 40 minutes from the ranger station. The local library housed a modest collection of regional history, including some documentation of the indigenous peoples who had inhabited the area before European settlement. The librarian, an elderly woman named Mrs. Harmon, raised an eyebrow when I requested access to the tribal archives. Research project, I explained vaguely. She led me to a small room in the back where several filing cabinets and bookshelves contained yellowed documents, photocopies of original manuscripts, and a few academic texts. The Blackwood tribe materials are limited, she said. Most of their oral history was lost when the last fluent speakers died in the 1940s. But Professor Reynolds from the State University did some field work here in the 70s. His notes might help. I spent hours poring over Reynolds' field notes, historical photographs, and transcribed interviews with tribal elders. Much of it covered familiar territory, hunting practices, seasonal migrations, family structures. But in one folder, labeled simply folklore, I found what I was looking for. Reynolds had documented stories of a creature called the Nakam by the Blackwood people. The descriptions varied somewhat, but consistently mentioned a tall, dark figure that patrolled the deepest parts of the forest. Some accounts described it as a guardian spirit, others as a fearsome predator that hunted those who trespassed on sacred ground. Most importantly, Reynolds had sketched several symbols that the elders identified as related to the Nakam. They matched exactly with the markings I'd photographed in the cave and clearing. According to Reynolds' notes, the Blackwood people had largely avoided the area around what we now called Blackwood Ridge. They considered it the Nakam's territory and entered only for specific ceremonial purposes. One elder had told Reynolds that the creature was not animal, not spirit, but something in between. I photographed the relevant pages with my phone, thanked Mrs. Harmon, and headed back to the ranger station with a growing sense of unease. The Blackwood people had lived in harmony with these mountains for thousands of years. If they had feared this area enough to avoid it, perhaps we should be doing the same. When I returned, I found Martinez in the radio room, his expression grim. "What's wrong?" I asked. "Two hikers went missing yesterday. Young couple, experienced outdoors people. They were last seen heading toward Blackwood Ridge," I finished, a chill running through me. He nodded. "Search and rescue is mobilizing now. Thompson's leading the operation. We have to go with them. Already arranged. We head out in 30 minutes. Martinez lowered his voice. "I didn't mention our theories, but Lawson, if what we suspect is out there, I know." The implications hung heavy between us. If the creature was responsible for the hiker's disappearance, we were dealing with something far more dangerous than we'd imagined. The search and rescue operation assembled quickly. Thompson, Chen, Dawkins, Martinez, myself, and 3 volunteers from the local mountain rescue team. We split into pairs, each assigned to different sections of the search grid. Martinez and I deliberately requested the quadrant that included the northern section of Blackwood Ridge. Thompson raised an eyebrow but approved the assignment without comment. "Remember standard protocols," Thompson instructed the group. "Radio checks every 30 minutes. If you find anything at all, call it in immediately. No heroes." We set out as the afternoon sun began its descent toward the western peaks. Martinez and I hiked in tense silence, both scanning the forest with heightened awareness. The day was clear, the storm's passage leaving behind blue skies and good visibility. As we approached the boundary of our search quadrant, I briefed Martinez on what I discovered at the library. "Nakam," he repeated the name. "And the Blackwood people avoided this area? Considered it forbidden territory, except for specific rituals." "Great," he muttered. We're walking into the monster's living room. We continued our search methodically, calling out the missing hikers' names at regular intervals. The forest remained stubbornly silent, no human voices responding to our calls. As dusk approached, we reached a rocky outcropping that offered a view of the surrounding terrain. Martinez suggested we take a short break before continuing with flashlights. "No sign of them," he said, uncapping his water bottle. "No sign of anything, really." I was about to agree when I caught it. That familiar, sickly sweet odor drifting on the evening breeze. "Martinez," I said quietly, "Do you smell that?" He sniffed the air, his face immediately registering recognition. "Like rotting meat, but different." "It's here," I whispered, scanning the trees below us. "Somewhere close." Martinez unholstered his sidearm, a precaution I quickly mimicked. We stood back to back, watching the surrounding forest as shadows lengthened with the setting sun. "There," Martinez hissed suddenly, pointing toward a dense thicket about 50 yards away. At first I saw nothing. Then a shadow moved, not with the wind, but independently, shifting position behind a large pine. Something large and dark, watching us. Martinez raised his radio. "Thompson, this is Martinez. We've got something. North Quadrant, grid G7. The radio crackled. "Define something, Martinez." He hesitated, eyes never leaving the spot where we'd seen movement. "Possible large predator. Request backup." "Copy that. Chen and Dawkins are closest to your position. ETA 20 minutes. Do not engage. Repeat, do not engage." "Copy," Martinez replied. "We'll maintain visual if possible." As he lowered the radio, the shadow moved again, this time emerging partially from behind the tree. Even in the fading light, I could make out its form. Tall, bipedal, covered in dark fur or hide. It stood perfectly still, watching us from the edge of the thicket. "Jesus," Martinez breathed. "That's not a bear." "No," I agreed, my mouth dry. "It's not." For several long moments we remained frozen in a bizarre standoff. Martinez and I on the rocky outcropping, weapons drawn but pointed downward, the creature motionless among the trees below. Then, faintly, we heard it. A human voice, calling for help. "Did you hear that?" Martinez whispered. I nodded, straining to pinpoint the direction. It had come from beyond the thicket, deeper in the forest. The creature's head turned toward the sound. Then, with surprising speed, it moved away from us, disappearing into the trees in the direction of the voice. "We have to follow it," I said, already starting down from the outcropping. "Lawson, wait," Thompson said. "Someone's out there, Martinez. One of the hikers, and that thing is heading straight for them." He cursed but followed me, both of us moving as quickly as we dared through the darkening forest. We followed the direction the creature had taken, pausing occasionally to listen for the voice. "Help! Is anyone there?" It came again, clearer now, a woman's voice, frightened but alive. "Hello," I called back. "Park rangers, keep calling out so we can find you." We pushed through dense underbrush, following the voice until we emerged into a small clearing. In the center, slumped against a fallen log, was a young woman, one of our missing hikers. Her clothes were torn, her face scratched and dirty, but she was alive. Martinez reached her first. "Are you Sarah Winters?" She nodded weakly. "My boyfriend, Tyler? Something took him." I scanned the clearing as Martinez attended to her, looking for any sign of the creature or the second hiker. The sickly sweet smell lingered in the air, but I saw no movement among the trees. "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "We were setting up camp when we heard something moving around us," she said, her voice shaking. "Tyler went to check. There was a scream. I ran." She began to sob. "It's okay," Martinez assured her. "You're safe now. We're going to get you out of here." He radioed our position to Thompson, reporting that we'd found one of the missing hikers. I continued to watch the surrounding forest, increasingly uneasy as darkness fell completely. "They're sending a medical evacuation team," Martinez said after signing off. "ETA 45 minutes. Chen and Dawkins are on their way to our position now." I nodded, my attention caught by something on the ground at the edge of the clearing. I moved closer, shining my flashlight on what appeared to be drag marks, wide furrows in the soft earth, leading away into the forest. Following them a short distance, I found something that made my stomach turn. A backpack, torn open, its contents scattered. A few feet away lay a hiking boot, still laced up, and on the surrounding vegetation dark stains that could only be blood. I hurried back to Martinez and Sarah, my discovery confirming my worst fears. Whatever had taken Tyler, it hadn't been interested in his equipment, only in him. "We need to move," I said quietly to Martinez. Now, he must have read the urgency in my face because he didn't question me. "Can you walk?" he asked Sarah. "I think so," she said, wincing as Martinez helped her to her feet. We started back the way we'd come, moving as quickly as Sarah's condition allowed. I took the lead, while Martinez supported her from behind. Every few minutes I would pause, listening for pursuit. We had covered perhaps half a mile when I heard it. Branches breaking, underbrush rustling. Something was moving parallel to our path, keeping pace with us through the trees. "Martinez," I whispered. 3 o'clock. moving with us. He nodded grimly, his free hand going to his sidearm. The sounds grew closer, more deliberate. Whatever was out there wasn't trying to hide its presence anymore. Suddenly, my radio crackled to life. Martinez, Lawson, this is Chen. We're approaching your coordinates. Do you copy? Before I could respond, a dark shape burst from the trees directly in our path. In the beam of my flashlight, I caught a glimpse of black fur, long limbs, and a face that made my blood freeze. No visible eyes, just a mouth filled with teeth too numerous and too sharp to be natural. Sarah screamed. Martinez shoved her behind him, drawing his weapon in one fluid motion. "Halt!" he shouted. "Park rangers! Do not move!" The creature paused, its head cocked at an angle that seemed impossible for any natural neck to achieve. It made that sound again, the rumbling growl with almost words embedded within it. Then it charged. Everything happened so quickly. Martinez fired 2 shots, the reports deafeningly loud in the quiet forest. The creature faltered momentarily but didn't fall. It let out a shriek that sent birds exploding from the trees around us. "Run!" I shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm. We turned and fled, Martinez backing away while keeping his weapon trained on the creature. It recovered with startling speed, leaping forward with inhuman agility. Martinez fired again, then turned to run after us. I heard him cry out, followed by the sound of a body hitting the ground. Looking back, I saw Martinez sprawled on the forest floor, the creature looming over him. Without thinking, I shoved Sarah behind a tree. "Stay there," I ordered, then charged back toward my fallen colleague. I fired my own weapon as I ran, aiming for the creature's center mass. It jerked at the impact but remained standing, turning its eyeless face toward me. In the beam of my dropped flashlight, I could see it more clearly now. Its body was humanoid but wrong somehow, the proportions slightly off. Its skin wasn't fur as I'd first thought, but something leathery and black, covered in what looked like lesions or growths. Martinez was conscious but dazed, blood streaming from a gash on his forehead. The creature stood between us, its attention now fixed on me. I emptied my magazine into it, each shot finding its mark. The creature staggered backward, making that terrible almost language sound again, louder now, angry. To my horror, it remained upright. The bullets had torn holes in its hide, revealing not blood, but a viscous dark substance that oozed slowly from the wounds. My weapon empty, I reached for the bear spray on my belt. The creature gathered itself, preparing to charge again. Then, from the darkness behind it came shouts and the beams of multiple flashlights. Chen and Dawkins had arrived. The creature's head swiveled toward the new threat. For a moment, it seemed to consider its options. Then, with surprising speed for something its size, it turned and vanished into the forest. Chen reached me first, his rifle at the ready. "What the hell was that?" "Help, Martinez," I gasped, rushing to my fallen colleague. He was sitting up now, pressing a bandana to his bleeding head. "I'm okay," he insisted. "It just knocked me down." Dawkins helped Sarah from her hiding place, while Chen scanned the surrounding forest with his rifle raised. "Should we pursue?" "No," I said firmly. "We get these people to safety first." We fashioned a rough stretcher for Martinez from branches and jackets, though he protested he could walk. Better safe than sorry. If he had a concussion, the last thing he needed was to hike miles through rugged terrain. The journey back was tense, all of us jumping at every sound in the forest, but the creature didn't return. By the time we reached the main trail, emergency medical personnel were waiting with Thompson. As the medics attended to Martinez and Sarah, Thompson pulled me aside. "What happened out there, Lawson?" I hesitated, knowing how it would sound. "We encountered a predator, possibly what attacked the hikers." "A bear?" "No," I said firmly, "not a bear." Thompson's expression darkened. Martinez radioed about gunfire. "You both discharged your weapons?" "It charged us," I said defensively. "We had no choice." "And this predator, did you kill it?" I shook my head. "Multiple direct hits. It was injured, but it fled when Chen and Dawkins arrived." Thompson studied me for a long moment. "I'll need full reports from both of you by tomorrow morning. Every detail." I nodded, knowing that the report I would write would test the limits of believability. But I had witnesses now. Martinez had seen it clearly, and even Chen and Dawkins had glimpsed it before it vanished. Back at the ranger station, I checked on Martinez in the first aid room. The medical technician was finishing bandaging his head. "Just a laceration and mild concussion," she informed me. "He should take it easy for a few days, but he'll be fine." When she left, Martinez looked up at me. "We both saw it, Lawson. Clear as day." "I know. Those bullets should have dropped it. Nothing living could take that many hits and still move like that." I sank into a chair beside him. Sarah said it took her boyfriend. We found drag marks, blood. Martinez closed his eyes briefly. So it's hunting humans now, or defending its territory. The Blackwood tribe avoided that area for a reason. We sat in silence for a moment, the implications sinking in. What do we do? Martinez finally asked. It was the question I'd been wrestling with since our encounter. The creature was real, dangerous, and apparently resistant to conventional weapons. It had already taken one life that we knew of, possibly more. We need to tell Thompson everything, I decided. Show him the evidence, the footprints, the symbols, what we learned about the Nakam. With what happened tonight, he has to take it seriously. Martinez nodded slowly. And if he doesn't, then we go over his head. Regional Director, State Wildlife Commission, whoever will listen. This thing is a threat to public safety. The next morning, still exhausted from the events of the previous night, I compiled everything we had. My photos, notes from the library, the marked map of sightings, and our fresh encounter report. Martinez joined me, his head bandaged but his determination undiminished. Thompson listened to our presentation without interruption, his face increasingly grim as we laid out the evidence. When we finished, he remained silent for a long moment. Under normal circumstances, he finally said, I would recommend both of you for psychological evaluation. I started to protest, but he held up a hand. But these aren't normal circumstances. 4 rangers firing on an unidentified creature, a missing hiker, physical evidence. I can't ignore this. Relief washed over me. So you believe us? I believe something dangerous is in our forest, Thompson said carefully. What exactly it is, I'm not prepared to speculate. But public safety is our primary concern. He picked up the phone on his desk. I'm closing Blackwood Ridge and the surrounding trails, effective immediately. Then I'm calling in specialists from the State Wildlife Department. Over the next week, the investigation intensified. Wildlife experts, forensic teams, and even an anthropologist familiar with Blackwood tribal history descended on our small ranger station. The area around Blackwood Ridge was cordoned off, with warning signs posted at all access points. Sarah Winters recovered physically, though the psychological trauma would take longer to heal. Search teams found no trace of her boyfriend Tyler, despite extensive efforts. His case was officially classified as a missing person, presumed dead due to animal attack. Martinez and I were debriefed multiple times, each of us separately recounting what we'd seen. Our stories matched in every detail, lending credibility to our account. Chen and Dawkins confirmed seeing a large dark figure moving with unusual speed before it disappeared into the forest. Forensic analysis of the blood found near Tyler's backpack confirmed it was human. More disturbing were the results from the black substance I'd seen oozing from the creature's wounds. Tests found it contained proteins and genetic markers that defied classification. Not consistent with any known species, the report stated clinically. The wildlife experts set up camera traps throughout the area, hoping to capture images of the creature. Most came back empty or with only normal forest inhabitants, deer, raccoons, the occasional black bear. But one camera, placed near the cave I had sheltered in, captured a single blurry image. A tall, dark figure moving through the trees at night, its form indistinct but unmistakably not human. 3 weeks after our encounter, I stood with Thompson and the regional director at the edge of the now restricted area. Warning signs had been permanently installed, and plans were underway for a more comprehensive study of the region. We're classifying this as a protected habitat of an unidentified indigenous species, the director informed us. No public access until further notice. And the danger it poses? I asked. The director sighed. We have one confirmed fatality that may be attributed to this creature. That's not enough to authorize elimination. For now, we observe, we study, and most importantly, we keep people away. It wasn't the resolution I'd hoped for, but it was something. The threat had been acknowledged, steps taken to protect the public. The creature, the Nakam, would remain in its territory, and we would stay in ours. As we turned to leave, I glanced back at the forest one last time. Through the trees, I caught a glimpse of movement, something dark shifting in the shadows, watching us go. A chill ran down my spine, but it wasn't entirely fear this time. The forest had its secrets, its guardians. Perhaps they weren't meant to be understood, only respected. I still work as a ranger in the Northern Cascades. I've requested never to be assigned patrols near Blackwood Ridge, a request that has been honored without question. Martinez transferred to another district, unable to shake the memories of that night. Sometimes, when the wind is right, I catch that sickly sweet smell drifting from the direction of the ridge. When I do, I turn and walk the other way. Some boundaries aren't meant to be crossed, but I know it's still out there, moving through its ancient territory as it has for countless generations. and I know that if I venture too deep into those particular woods, I might once again find myself face to face with something from the shadows, something that calls the darkness home.
1 and 6 here at UZ as my did.
The radio crackled with the usual end-of-shift chatter between dispatch and the other rangers scattered across Colorado's backcountry. Static mixed with tired voices reporting all clear from their sectors. I reached over and turned down the volume, letting the mountain silence creep back into my truck cab. I'd been working for the City Park and Recreation Department for 3 years, pulling double duty as a district ranger for the National Park Service. The pay wasn't great, but you can't put a price on these views. Every evening drive home felt like a reward, especially when autumn painted the aspens in gold and the air carried that crisp bite that promised winter was coming. This particular evening in October 2017 felt different somehow. The shadows seemed longer, the quiet more profound. I'd spent the day dealing with paperwork and a group of tourists who'd gotten themselves lost on what should have been a simple day hike. Nothing unusual, but something had left me unsettled. Maybe it was the way the lost hikers had described hearing strange calls echoing from deeper in the forest. Probably just elk, I'd told them. Probably. Bus 24 stretched ahead of me as I drove east toward Berthoud Falls, the familiar route I'd taken hundreds of times. The sun hung low behind the peaks, casting everything in that golden hour light that photographers pay thousands to capture. But tonight, even that beauty felt ominous. I noticed the turnoff to Rainbow Park approaching and made a decision that would haunt me for months afterward. Instead of continuing straight home to my empty apartment and another night of frozen dinners, I decided to make a quick patrol through the campground. It was getting late in the season, and we'd had reports of vandalism at some of the more remote sites. The access road wound down through thick stands of pine and aspen, gravel crunching beneath my tires. I'd driven this route countless times during the summer months, checking on campers and making sure everyone was following fire restrictions, but in October, with most of the seasonal campers gone, the place felt abandoned, forgotten. As I reached the bottom of the road where it opened into the main camping area, I saw it. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was looking at. It stood maybe 40 yards away, near the fire ring of Campsite 7. In that first instant, I thought it was a bear. Colorado black bears were common enough, and this time of year they were actively foraging before winter. But bears don't stand 8 feet tall, and bears definitely don't have wings. The creature was massive, easily the size of a small car. Its body seemed to be a grotesque mixture of human and feline proportions. Too long in the torso, too thick in the shoulders. The head was cat-like but wrong, with features that seemed almost human in their intelligence. And those wings, Christ, those wings, they weren't feathered like a bird's, but they weren't the leathery membrane of a bat either. The surface looked almost metallic in the fading light, with a texture I'd never seen before. They stretched at least 20 feet from tip to tip, maybe more. When it shifted slightly, I caught a glimpse of the underside, and my stomach lurched. The wing structure was all wrong. Too many joints, too many angles. I sat frozen in my truck, engine idling, hands gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles had gone white. The thing hadn't noticed me yet, or if it had, it didn't care. It seemed to be examining the fire ring, its massive head tilting from side to side like a dog trying to understand a new sound. Then it looked at me. Those eyes. I still wake up thinking about those eyes. They were large and dark, almost human in their expressiveness. But there was an intelligence there that felt ancient, predatory. We stared at each other across that campground, two species that shouldn't exist in the same world. The moment stretched between us like a taut wire. I could hear my own breathing, loud and ragged in the truck's silence. My radio continued its quiet chatter, the normal world carrying on while I sat face to face with something that defied every natural law I thought I understood. Then it moved. The creature crouched low, those massive wings spreading wide. I had a moment to appreciate just how enormous it really was before it leaped. Not jumped, leaped. It launched itself into the air with a power that made my truck shake from the displaced air pressure. The sound of those wings beating was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It wasn't the gentle whisper of bird flight or even the rapid flutter of a bat. This was deeper, heavier. Each wing beat sounded like canvas snapping in a strong wind, but amplified 100-fold. The ground beneath my truck actually vibrated with each stroke. I watched, transfixed, as it climbed rapidly into the darkening sky. It moved with a fluid grace that seemed impossible for something so large. Within seconds, it had cleared the tree line and disappeared against the star-filled darkness. I sat there for I don't know how long, engine still running, trying to convince myself that what I'd just seen was real. The rational part of my mind was already working overtime, trying to provide explanations. Maybe it was a hoax, some kind of elaborate costume or mechanical creation. Maybe I was having some kind of episode, a hallucination brought on by stress or fatigue. But I knew what I'd seen, and I knew it was real. Finally, I managed to put the truck in drive and slowly approached the area where the creature had been standing. My headlights illuminated the campsite, and my heart nearly stopped. The ground around the fire ring was torn up, with impressions that looked like massive footprints. But these weren't bear tracks or any animal tracks I'd ever seen. They were too large, too deep, and the pattern was all wrong. Whatever had made them was heavy, much heavier than any creature that could possibly take flight. I grabbed my flashlight and got out of the truck, despite every instinct screaming at me to drive away as fast as possible. The impressions were even more disturbing up close. They looked almost hand-like, but with claw marks at the tips, and they were pressed deep into the hard-packed earth, as if the creature weighed several tons. Standing there in the beam of my flashlight, looking at evidence that no one would ever believe, I felt the first real chill of fear. This wasn't just some unusual wildlife sighting. This was something else entirely. The drive home was a blur. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see that massive shape following me through the darkness. Every shadow seemed to move. Every sound made me jump. By the time I reached my apartment, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlock the door. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at my kitchen table, staring out the window, replaying every detail of the encounter in my mind. When dawn finally came, I almost convinced myself it had been a dream. Almost. But I knew better. I'd seen something that shouldn't exist, something that challenged everything I thought I knew about the world. And somehow, I knew this was just the beginning. The next few days passed in a haze of normalcy that felt increasingly surreal. I went to work, filed reports, answered questions from tourists, and pretended that my world hadn't been fundamentally altered. But every quiet moment was consumed by thoughts of what I'd witnessed at Rainbow Park. I found myself constantly checking cryptozoology websites during my lunch breaks, scrolling through blurry photos and shaky videos of alleged creature sightings. Most of it was obvious hoaxes or misidentified wildlife, but some of the accounts made my blood run cold with their familiarity. 3 days after my encounter, I discovered recryptids on Reddit. I'd never been much of a Reddit user before, but desperation makes you try new things. The community was exactly what I needed. People who took these sightings seriously, who approached them with scientific curiosity rather than immediate dismissal. I spent hours reading through posts, looking for anything that matched what I'd seen. Most were about Bigfoot, lake monsters, or Mothman sightings. But buried deep in the archives, I found something that made my heart race. A post from 8 months earlier, titled, "Winged Humanoid Near Pike National Forest, Colorado." The account was eerily similar to mine. A Forest Service worker had been driving a back road near Woodland Park when they spotted what they described as a huge flying creature with a cat-like head and metallic wings. The post had only gotten a few comments, mostly jokes about too much mountain air affecting people's judgment, but the details were too specific, too consistent with my own experience to dismiss. The witness described the same massive size, the same unnatural wing structure, the same intelligent eyes. They'd also mentioned finding unusual impressions in the ground, though they hadn't taken photos. I created an account and sent them a private message. 3 hours later, I got a response that made my hands shake as I read it. "Holy shit, you saw it too? I've been keeping quiet about this for months because I thought I was losing my mind. Can you talk? I have more information." We arranged to meet the next day at a coffee shop in Denver. The drive felt like the longest of my life. Marcus Webb turned out to be a soft-spoken guy in his 40s who worked as a fire prevention specialist for the Forest Service. He had the kind of weathered face you see on people who spend most of their time outdoors, and eyes that held the same haunted quality I saw in my own reflection these days. "I've been researching this thing for 8 months, he said, sliding a thick folder across the table between us. "Ever since my sighting. I think we're dealing with something that's been in these mountains for a long time." The folder contained printouts of newspaper articles dating back to the 1940s, historical accounts of giant birds and flying demons in the Colorado Rockies. Some were obvious folklore, but others had the ring of truth to them. Multiple witnesses, consistent details, sightings across decades. "Look at this one," Marcus said, pointing to a yellowed article from 1962. Pilot flying over the Continental Divide reported a massive winged creature that paced his aircraft for several minutes before disappearing into a canyon. He was ridiculed by the aviation community, but his description matches ours perfectly. I studied the article feeling goosebumps rise on my arms. The pilot described wings with an unusual metallic sheen, a feline head, and movements that defied known aerodynamics. "There's more," Marcus continued, pulling out a hand-drawn map marked with red X's. "I've been tracking sightings, both historical and recent. Look at the pattern." The X's clustered around specific areas of the Front Range, with a heavy concentration near Pike National Forest and extending north toward my area around Berthoud Falls. It wasn't random. There was definitely a pattern, following the mountain corridors and avoiding heavily populated areas. "I think they migrate," Marcus said. "Following the mountains, probably hunting. The sightings increase in fall and spring, which suggests seasonal movement." We spent 3 hours going through his research. He'd documented 17 credible sightings over the past 70 years, all in Colorado, all describing creatures that matched what we'd seen. Most witnesses had been alone, and most had been too afraid or embarrassed to report their encounters officially. "The internet has changed things," Marcus explained. "People are more willing to share these experiences online, even if they won't go to the authorities. I've found discussion threads on paranormal forums, cryptozoology sites, even some local Facebook groups." He showed me printouts of forum posts, many describing encounters with winged giants in the Colorado mountains. The details were remarkably consistent: massive size, cat-like features, metallic or unusual wing structure, incredible speed and agility in flight. But what really got my attention was a recent post on a paranormal forum called Above Top Secret. A user named Colorado Hiker had shared a story about backpacking in the Sangre de Cristo Mountains 6 weeks earlier. "Third night of my solo trip, camped near treeline. Woke up around 2 a.m. to what sounded like massive wings flapping overhead. Looked out of my tent and saw this huge shape silhouetted against the stars. At first I thought it was a plane, but it was moving wrong, too fluid, too organic. It circled my camp 3 times before flying off toward the peaks. In the morning I found these weird impressions in the dirt near my tent, like something had landed. They weren't from any animal I know. Haven't been able to get it out of my head since." The post included grainy photos taken with a phone camera. The impressions were barely visible in the poor lighting, but they looked similar to what I'd found at Rainbow Park. "I've tried contacting some of these people," Marcus said. "Most never respond, or they delete their posts after a few days. I think they get scared when someone takes them seriously." As we prepared to leave, Marcus handed me a business card for a website I'd never heard of, mountainwatchers.net. "It's a private forum for people who've had encounters in the Rockies," he explained. "Invitation only. The administrator is a researcher named Dr. Sarah Chen. She's a retired anthropologist who's been documenting unexplained phenomena in the American West for 20 years. I sent her my account last month, and she invited me to join. I could put in a word for you." That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my laptop open beside me displaying forum after forum of cryptid encounters. The deeper I dug, the more convinced I became that Marcus was right. This wasn't just random sightings of misidentified aircraft or hoaxes. There was a pattern here, a consistency that suggested something real. I found myself bookmarking dozens of sites: Cryptomundo, the International Cryptozoology Museum's blog, various Reddit communities dedicated to unexplained sightings. Each new account I read added another piece to a puzzle that was becoming increasingly clear and increasingly terrifying. Around 3 a.m., I received an email from mountainwatchers.net. Dr. Sarah Chen had reviewed Marcus's recommendation and my initial account of the Rainbow Park encounter. I was being invited to join their private forum. The registration process was more thorough than anything I'd encountered online. They wanted detailed written accounts, specific location data, and required me to submit to a brief video interview with Dr. Chen herself. 2 days later, I found myself sitting in front of my webcam, talking to a sharp-eyed woman in her 60s who asked questions that made it clear she was no amateur researcher. "The wing structure you described is particularly interesting," she said, making notes as we spoke. "Very few witnesses mention the metallic appearance, but those who do are remarkably consistent in their descriptions. Can you tell me more about the sound they made?" I described the heavy, canvas snapping noise, the way each wing beat seemed to displace massive amounts of air. "Fascinating," Dr. Chen murmured. "That suggests a wing structure unlike anything in known biology. The power required to generate that kind of thrust in a creature of the size you describe would be enormous." She asked about the ground impressions, the creature's behavior, even the weather conditions that evening. Every detail seemed significant to her. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said finally, "I'm going to give you access to our archive. What you'll find there may disturb you. but I believe you have a right to know what you're dealing with. These creatures, we call them the Cordillera raptors, for lack of a better term, have been sharing these mountains with us for longer than most people realize. How long? I asked. Her expression grew grave. Based on our research, possibly centuries, maybe longer. The forum archive was a revelation and a nightmare rolled into one. Dozens of detailed encounters, some with multiple witnesses, video footage that defied explanation, audio recordings of those terrible wing beats, historical accounts dating back to Native American legends. But it was the recent reports that truly chilled me. The creatures weren't just passive observers anymore. They were becoming bolder, more aggressive. 3 hikers had gone missing in the past year under circumstances that suggested aerial predation. Search and rescue teams had found camping gear shredded by massive claws, but no bodies. As I scrolled through account after account, one thing became terrifyingly clear. My encounter at Rainbow Park wasn't an ending, it was just the beginning, and according to the forum's tracking data, the creatures were moving north along the Front Range, heading directly toward populated areas. Heading toward us, sleep became a luxury I could no longer afford. Every night brought dreams of those massive wings beating overhead, of intelligent eyes watching from dark skies. During the day, I found myself constantly scanning the horizon, jumping at every shadow that moved too quickly across my peripheral vision. It had been 2 weeks since my encounter at Rainbow Park, and I knew I had to go back. The rational part of my mind screamed against it, but I needed answers. More importantly, I needed proof. The forum members on mountainwatchers.net had been supportive, but I could sense their polite skepticism. Without physical evidence, I was just another witness telling an impossible story. I planned my return carefully. I'd learned from Dr. Chen's research protocols. Good documentation required the right equipment. I borrowed a high-quality camera from the Park Service, one with excellent night vision capabilities. My personal camera had been upgraded with a telephoto lens that could capture details from a considerable distance. I packed extra batteries, multiple memory cards, and a portable floodlight powerful enough to illuminate half the campground. Most importantly, I brought plaster of Paris and measuring tools. If I could get decent casts of those impressions, it would be the first physical evidence of the creatures that anyone had managed to collect. The drive back to Rainbow Park felt like descending into a nightmare I'd already lived. Every familiar landmark seemed ominous now, every shadow potentially concealing something that shouldn't exist. When I reached the turnoff, I had to force myself to make the turn instead of continuing straight home to safety. This time, I approached slowly, lights off, letting my truck roll to a stop at the edge of the campground. The place looked exactly as I'd left it, empty, silent, somehow expectant in the fading afternoon light. I grabbed my equipment and walked to campsite 7, where I'd first seen the creature. The impressions were still there, though weathered by 2 weeks of mountain weather. They were fainter now, partially filled with fallen leaves and debris, but still clearly visible to anyone who knew what to look for. Working quickly before the light failed completely, I began cleaning out the clearest print. It was even more disturbing up close than I remembered. The impression was roughly hand-shaped but wrong in every proportion. Too large, too deep, with claw marks that gouged the earth in patterns that hurt to look at. As I mixed the plaster and prepared to make the cast, I heard it, a sound like massive fabric snapping in wind, distant but unmistakable. Those wings. I froze, plaster spoon halfway to the impression, and listened. The sound came again, closer this time, from somewhere beyond the tree line to the west. My hands started shaking so badly I nearly dropped the mixing bowl. Every instinct told me to run, to abandon the cast and get back to my truck as fast as possible. But I forced myself to stay calm, to think like a researcher instead of prey. This might be my only chance to get the evidence I needed. I poured the plaster quickly, probably too quickly, trying to create a usable cast while that terrible sound grew steadily closer. The wing beats were accompanied now by something else, a low vocalization that sounded almost like speech, but in no language I'd ever heard. By the time I finished the cast, full darkness had settled over the campground. I turned on my portable floodlight and immediately regretted it. The harsh LED beam illuminated the campsite in stark white light, but it also announced my presence to anything watching from the darkness beyond. The vocalization stopped. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the sounds had been. It felt loaded with potential, like the moment before lightning strikes. I stood there with my floodlight, feeling horribly exposed, while something enormous circled just beyond the range of my vision. Then I saw the eyes, 2 pinpricks of reflected light, high in the pine trees at the edge of the campground. They were at least 30 feet off the ground, which meant whatever owned them was either perched on a branch that shouldn't support that kind of weight, or hovering in place with impossible precision. I grabbed my camera and tried to focus on those eyes, but the autofocus kept hunting, unable to lock onto a target in the darkness. When I switched to manual focus, the eyes vanished. The sound of movement came from directly overhead. I looked up and immediately wished I hadn't. Something massive blotted out the stars, a darkness against darkness that my brain struggled to process. It was close enough that I could make out details. The underside of those alien wings, the sleek lines of an impossibly large body, appendages that might have been arms or legs folded against its torso. As I watched, paralyzed by a mixture of terror and fascination, it began to descend. The creature landed with surprising grace about 20 yards away, just at the edge of my floodlights range. For the second time in 2 weeks, I found myself face to face with something that couldn't exist. This close, I could see details that my memory had failed to capture from the first encounter. The creature's hide wasn't fur or scales, but something in between, a material that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Its limbs were longer and more articulated than I'd realized, with joints that bent in ways that made my eyes water to track. But it was the head that held my attention. That massive feline skull with its 2 human eyes was tilted slightly, studying me with an intelligence that felt ancient and utterly alien. When it opened its mouth slightly, I caught a glimpse of teeth that belonged in no known taxonomy. We regarded each other across the illuminated space, predator and prey locked in a moment that stretched toward eternity. I could hear my own breathing, ragged and loud in the mountain silence. My camera hung forgotten in my hands, the documentation I'd come here to collect suddenly seeming insignificant compared to the simple fact of surviving this encounter. The creature took a step forward, and I nearly bolted, but something in its posture stopped me. A careful, almost cautious quality to its movement. It wasn't attacking, it was investigating, slowly fighting every survival instinct screaming in my head. I raised my camera and took a picture. The flash strobed across the campground, turning everything stark white for an instant. The creature flinched back, those massive wings spreading defensively, but it didn't flee. Instead, it cocked its head in what almost looked like curiosity. I took another picture, then another. The creature watched each flash with what I could only describe as fascination. It was studying my equipment the same way I was studying it, trying to understand something completely outside its experience. This continued for perhaps 5 minutes, though it felt like hours. I burned through an entire memory card, capturing images from every angle I could manage without moving closer. The creature remained perfectly still for most shots, as if it understood what I was doing and was cooperating. Then something changed. The creature's posture shifted, becoming more alert, more tense. Its head swiveled toward the access road, and I heard what had caught its attention, the distant sound of an engine. Someone else was coming. The creature looked back at me one final time, and I swear I saw something like regret in those ancient eyes. Then it crouched low and launched itself skyward with a power that knocked me backward. The wing beats hammered the air above the campground as it climbed rapidly into the night sky. Within seconds it had vanished completely, leaving only the lingering echo of its passage and the sound of an approaching vehicle. A Park Service truck emerged from the trees, headlights sweeping across the campground. I recognized the driver, Jim Martinez, one of the senior rangers who'd worked these mountains for 20 years. He pulled up next to my truck and climbed out, looking puzzled. "Evening, Rodriguez," he called. "Dispatch said they saw light out here. Everything okay?" I looked down at my camera, then at the plaster cast still setting beside the fire ring, then back at Jim's concerned face. "How do you explain to a colleague that you've just spent 5 minutes photographing something that shouldn't exist?" "Just doing some follow-up documentation on that vandalism report," I said, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Taking pictures of the damage for the file." Jim nodded, but his expression remained puzzled. "Must have been some serious vandalism to need those big lights. Mind if I take a look?" He walked over to where I'd been working, and I watched his face change as he spotted the impression in the ground and the half-set plaster cast. "What kind of print is that?" he asked, crouching down for a closer look. I joined him, studying the cast in the beam of his flashlight. Even partially set, it clearly showed the hand-like impression with its impossible proportions and claw marks. "I was hoping you might know," I said. "Never seen anything like it." Jim was quiet for a long moment, studying the cast from different angles. When he finally spoke, his voice was troubled. "Rodriguez, how long have you been working these mountains?" 3 years. "Why?" "Because in 20 years up here, I've learned that some things are better left alone." He stood up and looked directly at me. Whatever made this print, whatever you're really out here documenting, be careful. These mountains are older and stranger than most people realize. He walked back to his truck without another word, leaving me standing over my plaster cast with a dozen new questions racing through my mind. An hour later, I was back home with a memory card full of potentially impossible photographs and a plaster cast that could change everything. But as I uploaded the images to my computer, I discovered something that made my blood run cold. Every single photograph was corrupted. The files were there, but when I tried to open them, I got only error messages or blank screens. Hours of documentation, the clearest evidence anyone had ever captured of the creatures, had been somehow destroyed. All I had left was a plaster cast and the growing certainty that whatever was happening in these mountains, it was far more complex than I'd imagined. And judging by Jim's reaction, I wasn't the only one who knew about it. The corrupted photos haunted me for days. I tried every data recovery program I could find, contacted the camera manufacturer, even took the memory card to a computer specialist in Denver. Nothing worked. The files were there but inaccessible, as if they'd been deliberately scrambled by something that understood digital technology. Dr. Chen wasn't surprised when I reported the failure on the Mountain Watchers forum. "Electronic interference is common during close encounters," she posted in response to my account. "We've documented dozens of cases where cameras, recording equipment, even vehicle electronics have malfunctioned during sightings. The creatures seem to emit some kind of electromagnetic field, possibly as a defense mechanism." Other forum members shared similar experiences. Blurry photos, dead batteries, recording devices that produced only static. It was as if the creatures existed in a bubble of technological failure, making documentation nearly impossible. But I still had the plaster cast. The impression was extraordinary, far larger and more detailed than any footprint in the fossil record. When I posted high-resolution photos of it on the forum, the response was immediate and intense. Dr. Chen called me personally within hours. "That cast is remarkable," she said without preamble. "We've never had anything so clear, so detailed. With your permission, I'd like to bring in a colleague to examine it." The colleague turned out to be Dr. Michael Hendricks, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Colorado who specialized in unusual skeletal remains. He drove up to my apartment the next evening, carrying a briefcase full of measuring instruments and recording equipment. Dr. Hendricks was younger than I'd expected, maybe mid-30s, with the intense focus of someone obsessed with solving puzzles. He spent 2 hours examining the cast from every angle, taking measurements, making notes, occasionally muttering things like impossible digit ratios and non-mammalian metacarpal structure. "This isn't from any known animal," he said finally, sitting back with a troubled expression. "The proportions are all wrong. It's too large to belong to any flying creature on record, but the claw structure suggests adaptation for both perching and grasping prey." He showed me his sketches, anatomical drawings that attempted to reconstruct the full appendage based on the impression. The result looked like something from a paleontologist's nightmare. Part hand, part talon, scaled up to impossible dimensions. "If this is genuine," Dr. Hendricks continued, "and I have no reason to think it's not, then you've documented something that challenges everything we understand about aerodynamics and biology. A creature of this size simply couldn't achieve powered flight with any known wing structure." "But it did fly," I insisted. "I watched it take off. The power was incredible." Dr. Hendricks nodded slowly, "which suggests we're dealing with something that operates outside conventional biological parameters. The question is, what?" He packed up his equipment and prepared to leave, but hesitated at the door. "There's something else," he said. "Dr. Chen asked me to share this with you if the cast proved authentic." He handed me a folder marked with the mountainwatchers.net logo. Missing persons reports from the Front Range, dating back 5 years. All unexplained disappearances in remote areas. I opened the folder after he left, and immediately wished I hadn't. 17 missing hikers, climbers, and campers. All had vanished without a trace from locations along the mountain corridors where creature sightings had been reported. Search and rescue teams had found abandoned campsites, shredded gear, and in 3 cases, evidence of massive aerial predation, but no bodies. The most recent disappearance had occurred just 2 weeks ago, less than 20 miles from Rainbow Park. I spent the night reading through incident reports, studying maps, correlating disappearance locations with sighting data from the forum. A clear pattern emerged, one that made my hands shake as I plotted it on my wall map. The disappearances were following the creature migration routes that Marcus had identified. North along the Front Range, through exactly the areas where witnesses had reported increased activity. But it was worse than just random predation. The pattern suggested intelligence, planning. The creatures were hunting systematically, targeting isolated individuals in areas where the disappearances would be attributed to natural causes. Falls, exposure, getting lost in the wilderness. The next morning brought a message on the forum that made everything worse. Emergency meeting tonight. Virtual conference room 7, 9 p.m. Mountain Time. New developments. Dr. Chen. The virtual meeting included 12 forum members from across the western United States, each of them a witness to creature encounters or unexplained phenomena in the mountains. Dr. Chen looked grim as she opened the session. "We've had a breakthrough," she began, "and it's not good news." She shared her screen displaying a satellite image of the Colorado Rockies with overlay data showing creature sighting locations over the past decade. The pattern was undeniable, a clear migration corridor running north-south along the Continental Divide, with secondary routes branching into populated areas. "The sightings have been increasing exponentially," Dr. Chen continued, "not just in frequency but in boldness. The creatures are no longer avoiding human contact, they're seeking it out." A forum member from Utah raised her hand. "I had another encounter last week. The creature actually landed near my campsite and stayed for almost an hour. It seemed to be studying my equipment, my behavior, like it was learning." Similar reports came from across the group. Close encounters, prolonged observations, creatures that showed increasing curiosity about human activities. The pattern suggested adaptation, intelligence, purposeful behavior, but it was Marcus who delivered the news that changed everything. "I've been in contact with a source at NORAD," he said, his voice tense. "Someone who's been tracking anomalous air contacts over the Rockies for years. According to their data, we're not dealing with isolated creatures, we're dealing with a population." He shared radar data that showed dozens of large, fast-moving contacts throughout the mountain regions. Objects that move too fast for aircraft, too large for birds, following flight patterns that defied conventional aviation. "The population is growing," Marcus continued, "and they're organizing. The radar tracks show coordinated movement, formation flying, behavior that suggests complex social structure." Dr. Chen nodded grimly. "Which brings us to the real reason for tonight's meeting. We have evidence that the creatures are planning something. Multiple witnesses have reported unusual gathering behavior, large groups of creatures meeting at high-altitude locations, vocalizations that sound almost like communication." She displayed photos taken by a mountaineer in Rocky Mountain National Park. The images were blurry, taken from a great distance, but they clearly showed dozens of massive shapes circling a mountain peak in coordinated patterns. "This was taken 3 days ago," Dr. Chen said. "Similar gatherings have been reported in Wyoming, Utah, and New Mexico, always at remote, high-altitude locations, always involving large numbers of creatures." The implications were terrifying. If the creatures were gathering, organizing, planning coordinated action, then humanity might be facing a threat beyond anything we'd imagined. "What do we do?" asked a forum member from Montana. Dr. Chen was quiet for a long moment. "We document everything, we gather evidence, and we prepare for the possibility that the age of hiding in the shadows is coming to an end." After the meeting ended, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall map with its red pins marking sighting locations and disappearances. The pattern was clear now, undeniable. The creatures weren't just random predators or isolated anomalies. They were an intelligence, a civilization, and they were preparing for something. Outside my window, the Colorado mountains loomed against the starlit sky, no longer beautiful but ominous. Somewhere in those peaks, ancient minds were planning humanity's future, and I was beginning to suspect that we might not have a place in it. I checked the locks on my doors and windows, closed the curtains, and tried not to think about how useless such precautions would be against creatures that could drop from the sky at will. But as I finally tried to sleep, one thought kept circling through my mind. If the creatures were planning something, if they were organizing for some kind of coordinated action, then my encounter at Rainbow Park hadn't been coincidental. I'd been selected, studied, marked, and sooner or later, they would be coming back for me. The call came at 3:17 a.m. on a Tuesday in November, 3 weeks after the virtual meeting. My phone's shrill ring cut through the mountain silence like a scream, jolting me from the light, troubled sleep that had become my norm. "Rodriguez?" The voice was Marcus Webb, but he sounded wrong, shaky, terrified. "Jesus Christ, you need to get out here, now." I was already reaching for my clothes. "Where are you?" 11-Mile Reservoir, State Park side. There's been, God, I don't even know how to describe it. Just come. And bring your camera equipment. The drive took 40 minutes through winding mountain roads, my headlights cutting through pre-dawn darkness that felt heavier than usual. The radio stayed silent, no friendly chatter from dispatch, no routine check-ins from other rangers, just static and an occasional burst of panicked voices using call signs I didn't recognize. I found Marcus's truck parked at the boat launch, emergency lights flashing. He was standing at the water's edge, staring out at the reservoir with the 1,000-yard stare of someone who'd seen too much. "Thank God you're here," he said without turning around. I didn't know who else to call. "What happened?" Instead of answering, he handed me a pair of binoculars and pointed toward the center of the reservoir. "Look for yourself." I raised the binoculars and felt my world shift on its axis. The water was full of them. Dozens of the creatures floated on the surface like massive, impossible water birds. Their wings were folded against their bodies, making them look almost peaceful in the pre-dawn light. But this wasn't rest or recreation. It was an assembly. A gathering unlike anything documented in our research. "How long have they been here?" I whispered. "I got here around midnight to check on some reports of unusual lights," Marcus said. "They were already in the water. More keep arriving every hour, coming from all directions." As if to emphasize his point, a massive shape descended from the northern sky, wings beating with that terrible canvas snapping sound. It landed among the others with barely a splash, settling into the formation like a piece in an enormous puzzle. I counted at least 60 creatures, probably more, the largest gathering ever documented, and they were doing something I'd never heard described in any of our research. They were vocalizing in unison. The sound was barely audible at first, a low harmonic that seemed to resonate through the water and into the ground beneath our feet. But as more voices joined the chorus, it grew into something that made my teeth ache and my vision blur around the edges. "It's been getting louder," Marcus said, pressing his hands to his ears. "Started about an hour ago. It's like they're communicating, coordinating." I pulled out my phone to call Dr. Chen, but the screen was dead. Marcus tried his radio, nothing but static. Our electronic equipment was being affected by the same interference we'd documented during close encounters, but on a massive scale. "We need to document this," I said, fighting down the panic rising in my throat. "Get video, audio, anything we can." Marcus nodded toward his truck. "Already tried. Cameras won't work. Recording devices are dead. Whatever they're doing, it's creating an electromagnetic field that shuts down everything electronic within a half-mile radius." The vocalization was growing more complex now, different tones weaving together in patterns that hurt to process. Some of the creatures had lifted their massive heads, necks extended toward the sky in postures that looked almost ceremonial. "They're waiting for something," I realized. "This isn't just a gathering, it's a ceremony, a preparation." Marcus grabbed my arm. "Look east." I turned and saw what had caught his attention. The horizon was beginning to lighten with the approach of dawn, but there was something else. Shapes moving against the brightening sky. More creatures, but flying in formations I'd never seen before. Precise geometric patterns that spoke of intelligence and planning. "How many do you think there are?" Marcus asked. I tried to count the approaching formations but gave up quickly. Hundreds, maybe thousands. The creatures in the water had begun to move, creating ripples that spread across the reservoir's surface in complex, intersecting patterns. The vocalizations were reaching a crescendo that made the air itself seem to vibrate. Then, as the sun's first rays touched the mountain peaks, everything stopped. The silence was more disturbing than the noise had been. 60-plus massive creatures floating motionless on dark water, all facing east toward the rising sun. The approaching formations had halted their advance, hanging in the sky like living storm clouds. "What are they doing?" Marcus whispered. I didn't have an answer, but something deep in my primitive brain was screaming warnings, flooding my system with adrenaline and a desperate need to run. The creatures began to rise from the water, not flying, rising. They lifted straight up in perfect synchronization, water streaming from their massive forms like rain. Within seconds they hung 30 feet above the reservoir's surface, maintaining their formation with impossible precision. The formations in the sky began to move again, but this time toward us. "We need to leave," I said. "Now." But Marcus was transfixed, staring up at the creatures above the water. "Look at their eyes," he said. "They're all looking at us." He was right. 60 pairs of ancient, intelligent eyes had turned in our direction, and as I watched, those eyes began to move. The creatures were descending, their formation intact, heading directly for the boat launch. We ran. Marcus's truck roared to life. Apparently the electromagnetic interference had a limited range. We tore out of the parking area with massive shapes dropping toward us like falling aircraft. I looked back to see the first creature land exactly where we'd been standing, its claws gouging deep furrows in the asphalt. "Drive!" I shouted, though Marcus was already pushing his truck to dangerous speeds on the winding park road. Behind us, the sky was filling with wings. The formations from the eastern sky had descended to treetop level and were following us, maintaining a pursuit speed that would have been impressive for military aircraft. "They're herding us," Marcus said, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. "Look at the formation. They're not trying to catch us. They're guiding us somewhere." He was right. The creatures could have easily overtaken us, but instead they maintained a steady distance, adjusting their positions to keep us on the main park road. Whenever Marcus tried to turn onto a side road, creatures would swoop low, forcing him back onto the intended route. We were being driven toward the park's main entrance, toward the highway, toward populated areas. They want witnesses, I realized. This isn't about hunting or hiding anymore. They're making contact. Official contact. The revelation was terrifying and exhilarating at the same time. Everything we documented, all the secret research and hidden encounters, was about to become public knowledge. We reached the park entrance and found it blocked by vehicles. Park service trucks, sheriff's department cars, and several black SUVs with government plates. Men in suits were setting up some kind of equipment, while uniformed officers established a perimeter. Marcus slammed on the brakes. "Feds," he said. "They know." A man in a dark suit approached our truck. He looked tired, like someone who'd been dealing with an impossible situation for far too long. "Rangers Webb and Rodriguez," he said, somehow knowing our names. "Agent Morrison, Department of the Interior, we need to talk." The conversation that followed revealed the scope of what we'd stumbled into. The government had been tracking the creatures for decades, documenting their population growth, monitoring their increasing boldness. The gathering at 11 Mile Reservoir was the culmination of years of preparation for what Agent Morrison called first contact protocols. "They've been studying us as much as we've been studying them," Morrison explained. "Learning our languages, our technology, our behavior patterns. What you witnessed today was their final preparation for formal contact." "Contact for what purpose?" I asked. Morrison's expression was grim. "Negotiation. The planet's resources are finite, and their population is growing. They need territory, hunting grounds, recognition of their claim to the mountain regions they've inhabited for possibly thousands of years." He handed us both documents marked with security classifications I'd never seen before. "Congratulations, gentlemen. You're now part of the contact team. Your research, your documentation, your direct encounters. The government needs your expertise." As we signed forms that bound us to secrecy levels beyond anything I'd imagined, the sky above us continued to fill with wings. Creatures were arriving from all directions, assembling in formations that stretched to the horizon. The age of hiding was over. Later that evening, as emergency broadcast systems announced to a shocked world that humanity was no longer alone on Earth, I stood on the roof of a government facility, watching formations of impossible creatures patrol the skies above Colorado. Dr. Chen had been right. The creatures were no longer content to remain hidden. But what none of us had predicted was that their revelation would come as a negotiation rather than an invasion. The negotiations would continue for months, establishing territorial agreements and protocols for coexistence. The world would change in ways none of us could have imagined. But that's a story for another time. For now, it was enough to stand beneath alien wings and wonder what other secrets these ancient mountains still held. What other intelligence had been watching us from the shadows, waiting for the right moment to step into the light? The mountains of Colorado had always been home to more than we realized. We were just finally being invited to meet the neighbors. I've never liked Mondays. Not because they start the week, but because in a town like mine, nothing good ever happens on a Monday. My name's Ryan Ellsworth, and back in 2014 I was the small-town cop for a place you've probably never heard of, Stillwater, Oklahoma. Population less than 7,000. Not exactly the kind of town you'd see on the news unless some out-of-towner crashed a tractor into the local diner. I'd been a cop in Stillwater for 5 years by then. It wasn't my first career choice. But when you're a guy who's flunked out of college and burned through 3 jobs in 2 years, you take what you can get. Besides, I liked it. It was simple. The most excitement I'd see on a given day was breaking up a drunk bar fight or arresting some kids spray painting the old train station. It wasn't much, but it paid the bills. That particular Monday morning started like any other. I woke up at 5:30 a.m. in my small one-bedroom apartment above Mabel's Bakery. The smell of fresh bread always seeped through the floorboards, which wasn't the worst alarm clock in the world. I showered, shaved, and put on my uniform, the same routine I'd followed for 1,825 days straight, give or take a few sick days. The station was quiet when I arrived. Patty, our dispatcher who'd been working there since before I was born, greeted me with her usual grunt and a styrofoam cup of coffee that tasted like it had been sitting on the warmer since yesterday. "Morning, Ryan," she said, not looking up from her crossword puzzle. "Sheriff wants to see you." Sheriff Bill Tanner was a man of few words and fewer expressions. When I stepped into his office, he was leaning back in his chair, staring at a map of Stillwater pinned to the wall. "Ellsworth," he nodded. "Need you on speed patrol today. Highway 51. College kids have been racing again." I nodded, knowing better than to argue. Highway patrol was boring as hell, but it beat paperwork. "Yes, sir." "And Ellsworth," he called as I turned to leave. "Try to stay awake this time." By 11:30, I was parked on the shoulder of Highway 51, radar gun in hand, watching for the usual speeding idiots. Most days I'd catch a couple of college students driving like they were auditioning for Fast and Furious. But today the highway was dead. Not a single car had passed in over 30 minutes. I sipped my second coffee of the day, feeling my eyelids grow heavy. The June heat was stifling, even with the cruiser's AC blasting. Cicadas buzzed in the tall grass beside the road, their drone almost hypnotic in the midday sun. My radio crackled to life, startling me from my near doze. "Ryan, we got a 1066 out by Miller's Field. Some hikers reported a body." Patty's voice was unusually tense. Now, in Stillwater, a 1066 doesn't mean much. It's a code for a suspicious person or incident. Usually it's nothing, a drunk passed out in a ditch, or kids messing around where they shouldn't be. 10-4, I responded, feeling a slight twist in my gut. On my way, I clicked on the siren and pulled onto the highway, heading toward Miller's Field. It wasn't a place you'd expect trouble, mostly farmland, a couple of dirt roads, and a lot of wide open space. The kind of place you'd go if you wanted to get away from people. When I pulled up, I saw a beat-up Ford truck parked by the side of the road and two guys standing in the middle of the field. One was tall and lanky, wearing a red Oklahoma State University hoodie despite the heat. The other was shorter, stockier, with a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. They looked spooked, glancing over their shoulders like something might jump out of the trees at any second. "Officer?" the taller one called as I got out of the car, waving me over frantically. "It's bad. Real bad." "Calm down, buddy," I said, walking up. "What happened?" "We were out hiking, just minding our own business," the shorter one said, his voice shaking, "when we stumbled on it over there," the taller guy said, pointing toward a small patch of woods on the edge of the field. "You'll see, it ain't normal." I grabbed my flashlight from the car and started toward the trees, my hand resting instinctively on my holstered gun. The field was overgrown, the grass tickling my knees as I made my way toward the tree line. "Stay here," I called back to the hikers. "Don't leave." The woods were dense, the canopy blocking out most of the sunlight. I switched on my flashlight, sweeping it across the ground as I moved deeper into the trees. I was expecting to find some dead animal or maybe a homeless guy who'd OD'd, but about 50 feet in, I smelled it. Rot. The thick, sour stench of something long dead. The kind of smell that sticks to the back of your throat and makes you gag. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, trying to filter the worst of it. As the smell grew stronger, I knew I was getting close. The trees opened up into a small clearing, and that's when I saw it, or what was left of it. It was a man, or at least it used to be a man. His body was mangled, torn to shreds like something had been using him for target practice. His face was barely recognizable, the skin ripped away in jagged chunks, and his clothes were soaked with blood and other fluids I didn't want to identify. "Jesus Christ," I muttered, crouching down to get a closer look despite my stomach churning at the sight. This wasn't some animal attack. I'd seen animal attacks before, coyotes taking down livestock, the occasional bear mauling a hiker who got too close to cubs. This wasn't it. This was something worse. The body was lying spread eagle on its back, arms and legs splayed out at unnatural angles. The chest cavity had been ripped open, exposing ribs that looked like they'd been snapped outward from the inside. Several organs were missing, and deep gashes crisscrossed what remained of the torso. But it was the face that disturbed me the most. The jaw had been completely torn off, and the eyes were gone, leaving empty sockets that seemed to stare accusingly up at the canopy of trees. I pulled out my radio, my hand trembling slightly. "Dispatch, we've got a 1054, possible homicide." My voice sounded steadier than I felt. The dispatcher came back with a crackle. 10-4 Ryan, sending backup. I stood up, glancing around the clearing. That's when I noticed something odd. There were no animal tracks, no sign of a struggle, just the body, as if it had been dropped there like a sack of meat. The trees were eerily still, not even a whisper of wind to rustle the leaves. My gut told me something was wrong. Very wrong. I circled the body, careful not to disturb the scene any more than necessary. There was something methodical about the way the man had been torn apart, almost deliberate. Like whatever had done this wasn't just killing for food or self-defense, it was enjoying it. The thought sent a chill down my spine despite the heat. I knelt down again, shining my flashlight on the ground around the body. That's when I noticed a small object glinting in the beam of light. I reached out, careful not to touch it directly, and used a pen from my pocket to roll it over. It was a small metal pendant on a broken chain, a St. Christopher medal, the kind you might wear for protection when traveling. I wondered if the dead man had been wearing it, a final irony in his violent end. The sound of approaching sirens pulled me from my thoughts. Backup had arrived. I stood up, feeling dizzy from the heat and the stench, and made my way back toward the field to meet them. As I reached the edge of the woods, I stopped and looked back over my shoulder. For a brief moment, I could have sworn I saw something move in the shadows between the trees. A flicker of movement, gone almost before I registered it. Just my imagination, I told myself. But deep down, I knew better. Something was watching me from those woods. And whatever it wasn't human. When the backup arrived, it was just me and two other officers, Rob Mercer and Diego Hernandez. They were rookies, barely out of the academy, and they looked at the body like it was going to sit up and start talking. "Jesus, what the hell did that?" Rob asked, his voice shaky as he knelt beside the corpse. "No idea," I said, standing up. But whatever it wasn't human. Hernandez crossed himself, muttering something in Spanish under his breath. He was the newest addition to our department, transferred from somewhere down in Texas. Good kid, but still green. "We should call the state police," he suggested, not taking his eyes off the body. This is beyond us, man." He wasn't wrong, but I knew Sheriff Tanner wouldn't appreciate us calling in outside help. Stillwater took care of its own problems. That was the unwritten rule. "Let's secure the scene first," I said, pulling out my camera to document the body and surrounding area. "We don't even know who this guy is yet." We set up a perimeter with yellow tape stretching between the trees around the clearing. The hikers had been questioned and sent home, with strict instructions not to talk about what they'd found. Not that it would help. In a town like Stillwater, news traveled faster than light. Dr. Margaret Chen, the county coroner, arrived about an hour later. She was a small woman with perpetually tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. She'd seen it all in her 20 years on the job, but even she looked shaken as she examined the body. "Time of death, approximately 36 to 48 hours ago," she said, her gloved hands probing the wounds with clinical detachment. "Cause of death, well, take your pick. Exsanguination, organ failure, trauma to just about every major system. Animal attack?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She looked up at me, her expression unreadable. "I've seen bear attacks, mountain lion attacks, even the occasional wolf. This isn't that." "Then what is it?" she sighed, standing up and peeling off her gloves. "I won't know more until I get him on the table. But off the record, these wounds are inconsistent with any predator I've ever studied. The pattern is all wrong." We bagged the body and called for transport. As the black bag was zipped up over what remained of the man's face, I felt a strange sense of relief. At least I wouldn't have to look at those empty eye sockets anymore. But something about the whole thing nagged at me. The body hadn't been there long, no more than a day or two, but it was already decomposing faster than it should have been. And then there were the wounds. They weren't clean, like you'd see from a knife or a gun. They were ragged, like something had torn into the guy with claws or teeth. "You okay, Ellsworth?" Hernandez asked as we walked back to our cars. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just thinking." "About what?" I paused, considering whether to share my concerns. "Did you notice anything strange about the scene? No animal tracks, no signs of struggle?" Hernandez frowned. "Yeah, that was weird. Like the body was just placed there." "Exactly. And if it was an animal, why didn't it eat more of the body? Predators don't usually leave that much meat behind." Rob joined us, his face pale in the late afternoon light. "Maybe it got scared off?" "By what?" I asked. "There's nothing out here for miles." The three of us stood in silence, each lost in our own thoughts. The sun was starting to dip toward the horizon, casting long shadows across Miller's Field. "We should head back," I finally said. "File our reports. Maybe by morning Dr. Chen will have some answers for us." But as I drove back to the station, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were missing something. Something important. The station was buzzing when I arrived. News of the body had already spread and everyone wanted details. Sheriff Tanner pulled me into his office as soon as I walked through the door. "Talk to me, Ellsworth," he said, leaning back in his chair. "What are we dealing with here?" I gave him the rundown. The body, the state it was in, the lack of evidence at the scene. As I spoke, his expression grew increasingly grim. "Any ID on the victim?" he asked when I'd finished. I shook my head. "Not yet. No wallet, no phone, just a St. Christopher medal we found near the body. Dr. Chen is checking dental records, but it might take a while." Tanner sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Keep this quiet for now. Last thing we need is a panic. Tell the boys to start canvassing, check missing persons, talk to the locals, see if anyone's noticed anything unusual lately." "What about the state police?" He fixed me with a hard stare. "Not yet. Let's see what we're dealing with first. For all we know, this could be some drug deal gone wrong, or a domestic that got out of hand." I wanted to argue that no domestic dispute I'd ever seen involved ripping someone's chest open, but I knew better than to challenge Tanner when his mind was made up. "Yes, sir." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the scene in my head, trying to make sense of it. The body, the clearing, the feeling of being watched. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those empty eye sockets staring back at me. By 3 a.m., I gave up on sleep altogether. I sat at my kitchen table, nursing a cup of coffee that had gone cold hours ago, and spread out the crime scene photos I'd brought home. Something about this case felt personal, though I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the brutality of it, or the mystery surrounding it, or maybe it was the nagging feeling that whatever had done this wasn't finished yet. I studied the photos one by one, looking for anything we might have missed. In one, the body lay sprawled on the forest floor, surrounded by leaves and twigs. In another, a close-up of the chest cavity, ribs protruding like broken fingers reaching for the sky. And then I saw it. Something I'd missed at the scene. In the background of one of the photos, partially hidden by shadows, was a mark on a tree trunk. It looked like claw marks, but too uniform, too deliberate. Almost like a symbol or a warning. I grabbed my jacket and keys. I needed to see it again to figure out what the hell had happened. The drive to Miller's Field took less than 15 minutes in the pre-dawn emptiness of Stillwater's streets. The moon was full, casting an eerie silver light over the landscape as I parked in the same spot I had earlier. Stepping out of the car, I was struck by how quiet it was. No cicadas, no nightbirds, not even the rustle of leaves in the trees. It was as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting for something. I clicked on my flashlight and started toward the woods, trying to ignore the voice in my head telling me this was a mistake. The yellow crime scene tape fluttered in the slight breeze, a stark reminder of what had been found here. As I ducked under the tape and stepped into the clearing, my flashlight flickering in the dim light, I noticed something I hadn't before. A trail. It was faint, almost invisible, but it was there. A series of deep gouges in the earth, leading away from the clearing and deeper into the woods. I crouched down, running my fingers along one of the marks. It was deep, at least an inch into the hard-packed dirt, as if something incredibly heavy had dragged itself along the ground. I stood up, my heart pounding in my chest. Every instinct told me to turn around, to go back to my car and pretend I'd never seen this. But I couldn't. I had to know. I followed the trail, each step feeling like a mistake. The further I went, the darker the woods became, as if the trees were closing in around me. My flashlight beam seemed weaker, struggling to penetrate the gloom. That's when I heard it. A low, rumbling noise, like something breathing heavy and slow. I froze, my hand reaching for my gun. But as I stood there listening, I realized the noise wasn't behind me, it was in front of me. I took a step forward, my hand shaking as I drew my weapon. The noise grew louder, a wet, raspy sound that made my skin crawl. And then I saw it. At first I thought it was a bear, but as it stepped into the moonlight that filtered through the canopy, I realized how wrong I was. It was bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. Massive, hulking, covered in thick matted fur that looked almost black in the shadows. Its shoulders were hunched, its arms too long, and its hands were like a man's but twisted, with fingers that ended in sharp, curved claws. I'd never seen anything like it, and I didn't want to see it again. It turned to look at me, and I felt every hair on my body stand on end. It didn't growl or roar, didn't lunge at me like you'd expect. It just stared, as if it were sizing me up, deciding whether I was worth the trouble. I didn't wait to find out. I raised my gun and fired. The first shot hit it square in the chest, but it didn't even flinch. The sound of the gunshot echoed through the trees, seeming to grow louder rather than fade away. The second shot, Well, I didn't get a second shot. It moved so fast, faster than anything that size should be able to move. And before I knew it, it was on me. It knocked me to the ground, its weight crushing the air from my lungs. Its claws ripped through my uniform vest like it was paper. I felt a searing pain across my chest as they tore into my flesh. I thought I was dead. I should have been dead. But it stopped. It leaned down, its breath hot against my face. A rancid smell of rot and decay that made me gag. Its eyes were black, like pools of oil, reflecting nothing, and then it just walked away, like I wasn't worth the effort. I lay there for what felt like hours, my whole body shaking, trying to understand what had just happened. When I finally dragged myself back to my car, I could barely stand. My chest was on fire, blood soaking through my torn uniform. I drove to the hospital, my vision blurring, hands slick with blood on the steering wheel. The last thing I remember before passing out in the emergency room parking lot was the creature's eyes, those bottomless black pits that seemed to look right through me. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that this was just the beginning. I woke up in a hospital bed, the sharp smell of antiseptic burning my nostrils. For a moment, I couldn't remember how I'd gotten there. Then it all came rushing back. The woods, the creature, those terrible black eyes. I tried to sit up, but a stabbing pain across my chest forced me back down. Looking down, I saw bandages wrapped around my torso, spots of red seeping through the white gauze. "Easy there, cowboy," a voice said from beside the bed. It was Sheriff Tanner, looking more exhausted than I'd ever seen him. "You've got 3 broken ribs and about 20 stitches holding your chest together." "The thing in the woods," I croaked, my throat dry as sandpaper. "We found your car in the parking lot," Tanner cut me off. "You were unconscious, bleeding all over the place. The doctors say you're lucky to be alive." "Sheriff, listen to me. There's something out there. It's not a bear, it's not—" "Save it," he said, his expression hardening. "You were attacked by a bear, Ellsworth. Same one that killed our John Doe, most likely." I stared at him in disbelief. "A bear? Are you kidding me? I shot it point blank in the chest and it didn't even slow down. It had hands, for Christ's sake." Tanner leaned closer, lowering his voice. "Listen carefully. As far as anyone knows, you were attacked by a bear while investigating a crime scene. End of story. I don't want to hear any more nonsense about monsters in the woods. You understand me?" Before I could respond, a doctor walked in, the same one who'd been at the crime scene. Dr. Chen looked even more tired than the sheriff, dark circles under her eyes like bruises. "Officer Ellsworth?" She nodded. "Good to see you awake. How's the pain?" "Manageable," I lied. "What about the body from Miller's Field? Did you ID him?" She glanced at Tanner, who gave a slight nod. "James Merrick, 42, local hunting guide, reported missing 3 days ago by his wife when he didn't come home from a solo trip. Cause of death, officially? Animal attack. Bear? Most likely." I felt a surge of anger. "That's bullshit and you know it." Dr. Chen's expression remained neutral, but something flickered in her eyes. "I can only report what the evidence supports, Officer Ellsworth." "And what does the evidence support?" I pressed. "Because what I saw out there wasn't any bear." Tanner stood up abruptly. "That's enough, Ellsworth. You're on medical leave until further notice. Get some rest and we'll talk when you're thinking clearly again." After they left, I lay in the dark, trying to make sense of it all. Why was Tanner so determined to cover this up? What had Dr. Chen found during the autopsy that she wasn't telling me? I must have dozed off because the next thing I knew, it was dark outside. The hospital had quieted down, the only sounds the beeping of machines and the occasional squeak of rubber soles on linoleum in the hallway. "You're awake." The voice startled me. Dr. Chen was standing in the doorway, a manila folder clutched in her hands. She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "What time is it?" I asked, wincing as I shifted in the bed. "Almost midnight," she said, approaching the bed. "I need to show you something, but you can't tell anyone I was here." She opened the folder and spread several photos on the bed. They were autopsy photos of James Merrick, even more gruesome in the sterile lighting of the morgue. "I couldn't put this in my official report," she said, pointing to one of the images. "But look at the pattern of the wounds. See how precise they are, how they follow the major arteries and organs." I studied the photo, bile rising in my throat. She was right. The wounds weren't random or frenzied like you'd expect from an animal attack. They were calculated, deliberate. "And this," she continued, pulling out another photo. "I found residue in some of the deeper wounds, a kind of saliva or secretion I've never seen before. It was accelerating the decomposition process. breaking down the tissue at an alarming rate. "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. She met my gaze, her expression grim. "Whatever killed James Merrick wasn't an animal, at least not any animal known to science. And whatever attacked you in those woods, it's the same thing. Why is Tanner covering this up?" Dr. Chen shook her head. "I don't know. But he made it very clear that if I didn't rule it an animal attack, there would be consequences. He's scared, Ryan, and that scares me more than anything." After she left, I couldn't get back to sleep. My mind was racing, putting together pieces of a puzzle I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. One thing was clear: I couldn't trust Tanner, not with this. The next morning, a nurse helped me out of bed and into a chair by the window. My chest burned with every movement, but I needed to get mobile if I was going to get out of here. Rob and Hernandez visited around noon, bringing a sad bouquet of flowers from the gas station and awkward get-well wishes. "So a bear, huh?" Rob said, shifting uncomfortably. "That's rough, man." I looked at them both, trying to gauge how much they knew, how much they believed. "Yeah, a bear. That's what they're saying." Hernandez was staring at the floor, avoiding my gaze. I'd seen that look before. It was the look of someone holding something back. "What is it, Hernandez?" I asked. "What aren't you telling me?" He glanced nervously at the door, then back at me. "There's been another one. Last night, out near the old Dawson property. Same condition as Merrick." My blood ran cold. "Another body?" Rob nodded. "Woman this time. Local teacher Emily Lawson. Out jogging when it got her. And Tanner is still calling it a bear attack." "What else could it be?" Rob asked. But his voice lacked conviction. I leaned forward, ignoring the pain in my chest. "Listen to me, both of you. What's out there isn't a bear. I saw it, up close. It's something else, something wrong." They exchanged glances, the kind that said they thought I was losing it. I couldn't blame them. If I hadn't seen it with my own eyes, I wouldn't believe it either. "Just be careful," I said finally. "Don't go into those woods alone, and watch each other's backs." After they left, I made my decision. I couldn't stay in this hospital while that thing was out there killing people. I needed to get back to Miller's Field, to find something, anything that would prove what I saw was real. Getting out of the hospital wasn't easy, but I'd learned a few tricks over the years. I waited until shift change, when the nurses were busy handing over patients to their replacements. Then I slowly, painfully made my way down the back stairs and out through the service entrance. The pain was excruciating, but adrenaline kept me moving. I called a cab from a payphone. No way I could drive in this condition, and had it drop me off at my apartment. I needed to change, to get my spare gun from the safe under my bed, and I needed to think. As I unlocked my door, I noticed something odd. It was slightly ajar, as if someone had been inside. I drew my weapon, pushing the door open slowly with my foot. The apartment was dark, the only light filtering in through the blinds. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt wrong. The air was heavy, thick with a familiar smell that made my stomach turn. Rot. The same smell from the woods. I flicked on the light, my gun trained on the empty room. Nothing. The living room was clear, the small kitchen untouched. I moved toward the bedroom, each step sending jolts of pain through my chest. The bedroom door was closed. I took a deep breath, wincing at the pain in my ribs, and pushed it open. What I saw made my blood freeze in my veins. Written on the wall above my bed, in what looked like dark, dried blood, was a single word: soon. And on my pillow, placed with careful precision, was a St. Christopher medal, identical to the one we'd found near James Merrick's body. I didn't sleep in my apartment that night. Instead, I checked into a motel on the edge of town, paid cash, and used a fake name. Paranoid? Maybe. But when you've seen what I've seen, paranoia starts to look a lot like common sense. The message on my wall wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Whatever that thing in the woods was, it knew where I lived. It had been in my home, touched my things, and it wanted me to know it was coming for me. I sat on the edge of the motel bed, my service weapon on the nightstand beside me and the St. Christopher medal on the bedspread in front of me. The small silver pendant glinted in the harsh light of the bedside lamp. It looked ordinary enough. St. Christopher carrying the Christ child across a river, the standard Catholic imagery. But why leave it? What was the connection? My phone rang, making me jump. It was Dr. Chen. "Where are you?" she asked without preamble. "The hospital called, said you checked yourself out." "I needed to think," I said, not giving away my location. "Did you find anything else on Emily Lawson's body?" A pause. "Yes. The same saliva or secretion I found on Merrick. And something else. A foreign object lodged in one of the wounds." "What kind of object? A tooth? Or a claw fragment?" I've never seen anything like it. It's not from any animal native to Oklahoma, I can tell you that much. I looked down at the metal. What about religious symbols? Were there any on either victim? Religious symbols? No, not that I recall. Why? I told her about the medal, the message on my wall. She was silent for a long moment. Ryan, you need to be careful, she finally said. This thing, whatever it is, it's hunting you. After we hung up, I spread out everything I had on the motel bed. The crime scene photos, Dr. Chen's autopsy notes that she'd smuggled to me, newspaper clippings about both victims. I was looking for a pattern, a connection, anything that might tell me what this creature was and why it was in Stillwater. James Merrick, 42, hunting guide. Emily Lawson, 35, high school biology teacher. On the surface, they had nothing in common. Different ages, different professions, different lives. But there had to be something. I started digging deeper. Merrick's wife had mentioned he was out on a solo hunting trip when he disappeared. Solo, that was interesting. And Lawson was jogging alone when she was attacked. Both were isolated, vulnerable, but that didn't explain why the creature had spared me. It had me pinned, could have killed me easily. Instead, it let me go. Why? I turned back to the St. Christopher medal. Patron saint of travelers, protector against sudden death. Was that it? Some twisted religious symbolism? My phone rang again. Unknown number. Ellsworth? I answered cautiously. It's Hernandez. Don't talk, just listen. There's been another attack. Old man Jenkins out at his farm on County Road 8. Same MO as the others. But here's the thing. He's still alive. My heart raced. Where is he? County Hospital, ICU. They don't think he'll make it through the night, but he's conscious. Talking. I'm on my way. I hung up, grabbed my gun and the medal, and headed for the door. As I reached for the handle, I hesitated. What if this was a trap? What if the creature was waiting for me? But I couldn't ignore this chance. If Jenkins was alive, if he could describe what attacked him, it might be the proof I needed. The county hospital was a small facility about 20 minutes outside of Stillwater. By the time I arrived, it was past midnight, the parking lot nearly empty. I flashed my badge at the night nurse, who looked too tired to care much about protocol. ICU is on the second floor, she said, barely glancing up from her magazine. But I should warn you, he's in bad shape. The ICU was dimly lit, most of the patients asleep behind drawn curtains. A doctor was standing at the nurse's station, reviewing a chart. He looked up as I approached. Officer Ellsworth? Officer Hernandez said you might be coming by. I'm Dr. Patel. How's Jenkins? I asked. Dr. Patel's expression was grave. Not good. Multiple lacerations, punctured lung, severe blood loss. It's a miracle he made it this far. Is he conscious? Can I talk to him? Briefly. But don't excite him. His heart can't take much stress. Jenkins was in the last bed. A frail figure dwarfed by machines and tubes. His skin was ashen, his breathing labored. Bandages covered most of his visible body, many of them stained with fresh blood. I approached the bed quietly, not wanting to startle him. His eyes were closed, but as I came closer, they fluttered open, pale blue irises swimming in bloodshot whites. Mr. Jenkins? I said softly. I'm Officer Ellsworth. Can you hear me? He nodded weakly, his lips moving. I had to lean in close to hear him. Knew it would come, he whispered, his voice a dry rasp. Been waiting so many years. What came, Mr. Jenkins? What attacked you? His eyes widened, a hint of clarity breaking through the pain and medication. Not what. Who? It was Harlan. Harlan Dawson. The name hit me like a physical blow. Harlan Dawson had been dead for over 40 years. Mr. Jenkins, Harlan Dawson died in 1973. It couldn't have been him. A weak, wheezing laugh escaped his lips. Not dead, changed. We did it. All of us. We had to. He knew. Things. Terrible things. I frowned, trying to make sense of his ramblings. What did you do? Who's we? The town council, back then. Me, Tanner's father, the old doctor. 5 of us. Harlan was experimenting. Animals at first, then people. Had to stop him. A chill ran down my spine. Are you saying you killed Harlan Dawson? Jenkins' eyes were drifting closed, his strength fading. Tried to. Thought we did. But he changed. Before the end. Not human anymore. Promised he'd come back, for all of us. Started with my grandson, James. James Merrick was Jenkins' grandson. That was the connection. And Emily Lawson? How does she fit in? Doctor's daughter. One of the 5. Last one is me. His breathing was becoming more labored, the monitors beside his bed beeping more urgently. He's hunting us, our families, one by one. Won't stop until we're all gone. Dr. Patel appeared at my side. I need to ask you to leave now. He needs rest. I nodded, but Jenkins' hand shot out with surprising strength, grabbing my wrist. The metal, he gasped. We all had one. Protection didn't work. I pulled the St. Christopher medal from my pocket. Like this one? His eyes widened in terror. Where did you get that? It was left in my apartment, and we found one near your grandson's body. He's marked you, Jenkins whispered, his voice fading. Just like he marked us, all those years ago. You're next. The monitors started wailing as Jenkins' body convulsed. Dr. Patel shouted for assistance, pushing me aside as he rushed to the bedside. I backed away, watching as the medical team fought to save Jenkins' life, but I already knew it was too late. The creature, Harlan Dawson, if Jenkins was to be believed, had claimed its third victim. As I left the hospital, my mind was racing. If Jenkins was telling the truth, this wasn't some random animal attack. It was revenge, decades in the making, and somehow I'd been drawn into the middle of it. I needed to know more about Harlan Dawson, about what happened in 1973. And I needed to find out who the other two council members were, the ones whose families might be next on the creature's list. But as I reached my car, I realized I was being watched. Across the parking lot, partially hidden in the shadows of a large oak tree, was a figure. Too tall, too still to be human, those same black eyes reflecting the hospital's lights like pools of oil. It didn't move, didn't approach, it just watched. Waiting, I got in my car, hands shaking as I fumbled with the keys. As I pulled out of the parking lot, I glanced in my rearview mirror. The figure was gone, but I knew it wouldn't be gone for long. It had marked me, and sooner or later it was coming to collect. The Stillwater Library opened at 9 a.m. I was waiting outside the doors at 8:45, my nerves frayed from a sleepless night spent watching the motel room door, gun in hand. Every creak, every shadow had me on edge, expecting to see those black eyes staring back at me. Mrs. Finch, the elderly librarian who'd been there since I was a kid, raised an eyebrow at my appearance. Unshaven, clothes rumpled, dark circles under my eyes. "Rough night, Officer Ellsworth?" she asked as she unlocked the doors. "You could say that," I muttered, following her inside. "I need to look at the town archives, specifically anything from 1973 related to Harlan Dawson or the town council." She gave me an odd look. Harlan Dawson? Now there's a name I haven't heard in years. Nasty business that. "You remember him?" "I remember the rumors," she said, leading me toward the back of the library where the archives were kept. Brilliant man, but strange, kept to himself out at that old property on the edge of town. People said he was doing experiments, though no one knew exactly what kind. The archives were housed in a small room filled with filing cabinets and shelves of bound newspapers. Mrs. Finch pulled out several large books, bound copies of the Stillwater Gazette from 1973. "If you're looking for official town council records, they'd be at the courthouse," she said. "But these might have something. The Dawson incident was big news back then." I thanked her and settled at a dusty table, flipping through the yellowed pages. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. The headline from June 18, 1973, screamed in bold letters, "Local scientist dies in house fire." The article was brief, mentioning only that Harlan Dawson, 45, had perished when his remote home caught fire in the early hours of the morning. The cause was listed as undetermined, though faulty wiring was suspected. There was no mention of the town council, no hint of foul play. But several pages later, a smaller article caught my eye. "Missing persons cases remain unsolved." It detailed the disappearances of 3 Stillwater residents in the months leading up to Dawson's death. All 3 had last been seen near Dawson's property. I continued searching, flipping through months of newspapers. There was surprisingly little follow-up on either the fire or the missing persons cases. It was as if the town had collectively decided to forget about Harlan Dawson. Then I found it, a small photograph buried in the society pages from April 1973. It showed 5 men standing in front of the newly renovated town hall. The caption identified them as the Stillwater Town Council, Mayor Robert Tanner, the current sheriff's father, Dr. Harold Lawson, Emily's father, Thomas Jenkins, the old man who had just died, George Miller, owner of Miller's Field where the first body was found, and Reverend Michael Chen. Chen, the same last name as the coroner. It couldn't be a coincidence. I pulled out my phone and dialed Dr. Chen's number. She answered on the third ring, her voice hushed. I can't talk long, she said. What is it? Your father, I said without preamble. Was he Reverend Michael Chen? A long pause. Yes. He died 10 years ago. Heart attack. Why? He was on the town council in 1973. With Robert Tanner, Harold Lawson, Thomas Jenkins, and George Miller. They killed Harlan Dawson, or at least they tried to. Ryan, what are you talking about? I told her everything. Jenkins' confession, the pattern of killings, the St. Christopher medals. As I spoke, her breathing became more ragged. My father never talked about his time on the council, she said when I'd finished. But he was troubled, had nightmares, kept a loaded shotgun by his bed until the day he died. Did he ever mention Harlan Dawson? No, but... She hesitated. There was something. After my father died, I found a journal hidden in his study. Most of it was in Chinese, which I can't read well. But there were drawings, creatures, symbols, and one name, written over and over, Harlan. Where's the journal now? At my house, in my father's old desk. I need to see it, I said, and we need to warn George Miller. If the pattern holds, he or someone in his family is next. George Miller died last winter, she said. But his son Peter still lives in town, runs the hardware store on Main. I glanced at my watch. It was just past 10 a.m. Meet me at your house in 30 minutes. And be careful. This thing, it could be watching any of us. As I left the library, I tried calling Sheriff Tanner. He needed to know what was happening, even if he was determined to cover it up. But it went straight to voicemail. I left a brief message telling him to call me back as soon as possible. My next stop was the hardware store. Miller's Hardware was a Stillwater institution, a family-run business that had been on Main Street for generations. The bell above the door jingled as I entered, announcing my presence to the man behind the counter. Peter Miller was in his 60s, with thinning gray hair and thick glasses. He looked up from his newspaper, his expression souring when he saw me. Officer Ellsworth, he nodded. What can I do for you? Mr. Miller, I need to talk to you about your father, I said, approaching the counter. And about Harlan Dawson. The color drained from his face. I don't know what you're talking about. I think you do. Your father was on the town council in 1973 along with Robert Tanner, Harold Lawson, Thomas Jenkins, and Michael Chen. They killed Harlan Dawson, or at least they thought they did. Miller's hands were trembling. You need to leave. Now. People are dying, Mr. Miller. James Merrick, Emily Lawson, Thomas Jenkins. All connected to the council members. You could be next, or someone in your family. He reached under the counter, and for a moment I thought he was going for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a small silver object, a St. Christopher medal, identical to the ones I'd seen before. My father gave me this before he died, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. Told me to never take it off. Said it would protect me from him. Harlan Dawson? Miller nodded. Dad never talked about what they did. But he was scared right up until the end, said they'd made a mistake, that Harlan wasn't really dead, that he'd come back for all of them and their families. What was Dawson doing out there? What experiments? I don't know the details. Something about crossing over, reaching the other side. Dad said Harlan had found a way to transform himself to become something else, something not human. The bell above the door jingled again. I turned to see Sheriff Tanner standing in the doorway, his hand resting on his holstered weapon. Ellsworth, he said, his voice cold. You need to come with me. Did you get my message? I asked, not moving. No? But I got a call from the hospital. Jenkins is dead, and you were the last person to see him alive. I looked at him incredulously. You think I had something to do with that? He was dying when I got there, maybe. But you've been asking a lot of questions, stirring up things that are better left buried, like what your father did. The council killing Harlan Dawson to cover up his experiments? Tanner's face hardened. My father did what he had to do to protect this town. Harlan was sick, deranged. He was killing people, using them for his twisted research. And now something is killing the council members' families. Something that looks an awful lot like Harlan Dawson. If what Jenkins told me is true. Miller stepped out from behind the counter. Sheriff, is this true? Are we in danger? Tanner's expression softened slightly. Go home, Peter. Lock your doors. Don't let anyone in, not even if they say they're police. I'll send a patrol car to watch your house. After Miller left, Tanner turned back to me. You've really stepped in it this time, Ellsworth. This is bigger than you know. Then enlighten me. What the hell is going on in this town? He sighed, suddenly looking much older than his 50-some years. Not here. Come with me. We drove in silence, heading out of town toward the old Dawson property. It had been abandoned for decades, the land reclaimed by nature. All that remained of the house was a crumbling foundation, blackened by the fire that had supposedly killed its owner. Tanner parked at the edge of the overgrown driveway, cutting the engine. For a long moment, he just sat there, staring at the ruins through the windshield. "My father never told me the whole story," he finally said. "Just pieces, usually when he was drunk. Harlan Dawson was a scientist, worked for the government during the Cold War on some classified research, moved back to Stillwater in the late 60s to continue his work privately." What kind of work? Something to do with consciousness, with the barrier between life and death. He believed he could create a new kind of being, one that could exist in both worlds. Said it was the next step in human evolution. And the missing persons, Tanner's mouth tightened. Test subjects. Volunteers at first, then not. When people started disappearing, the council got suspicious. They investigated, found evidence of what Harlan was doing, but they couldn't go to the authorities. Too many questions, too much scrutiny on the town. So they took matters into their own hands. They killed him. They tried. But according to my father, Harlan had already begun experimenting on himself. He wasn't entirely human anymore. The fire was supposed to destroy everything. Harlan, his research, all evidence of what had happened, but my father was never sure they'd succeeded. And now Harlan is back, taking revenge on the people who tried to kill him. Tanner nodded grimly. Or something wearing Harlan's face. Whatever he became, it's not natural. It doesn't follow the rules of our world. Why didn't you tell me this from the beginning? Why the cover-up? Would you have believed me? He asked, his voice bitter. Besides, I wasn't sure it was him until Jenkins died. I hoped it was just some animal, something explainable. My phone rang, interrupting us. It was Dr. Chen, her voice frantic. "Ryan, where are you?" "I've been waiting." "I'm with Tanner," I said, "at the old Dawson property. He knows about Harlan, about what happened. You need to come to my house, now," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I found my father's journal. There's something you need to see. Something about how to stop Harlan." I relayed this to Tanner, who nodded. "Tell her we're on our way." As we pulled away from the Dawson property, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The woods seemed too quiet, too still, the same eerie silence I'd noticed at Miller's Field. Dr. Chen lived in a small, neat house on the outskirts of town. As we pulled into her driveway, I noticed her front door was slightly ajar. "Wait here," I told Tanner, drawing my weapon. Something's not right. I approached the house cautiously, every sense on high alert. The silence was deafening. No birds, no insects, just the sound of my own breathing. "Dr. Chen?" I called, pushing the door open wider. "Margaret?" The living room was in disarray, furniture overturned, books scattered across the floor. Signs of a struggle, or a search. I moved further into the house, Tanner close behind me despite my instructions to wait. The study was worse. Desk drawers pulled out, papers everywhere, as if someone had been looking for something specific. And then I saw her. Dr. Chen was lying on the floor behind the desk, a pool of blood spreading beneath her. I rushed to her side, feeling for a pulse. It was there, weak but present. "Margaret," I said, gently turning her face toward me. "What happened? Where's the journal?" Her eyes fluttered open, unfocused with pain. "Took it," she gasped. "He was here. Harlan said it was his now." "Who? Who took it?" But her eyes were closing again, her breathing shallow. Tanner was already on his radio, calling for an ambulance. I stood up, scanning the room for any clue as to where Harlan might have gone. A flash of silver caught my eye. A St. Christopher medal on the floor, covered in blood. I picked it up, turning it over in my hand. On the back, scratched into the silver with something sharp, was a message. "Miller's Field, midnight." "It's a trap," Tanner said, reading the message over my shoulder. "He wants us to come after him." "We don't have a choice," I replied. "He has the journal. Our only chance of stopping him. And if we don't go, he'll just keep killing." The ambulance arrived, and we watched as they loaded Dr. Chen inside. The paramedics' prognosis was guarded. She'd lost a lot of blood. But if they got her to the hospital quickly, she had a chance. As the ambulance pulled away, Tanner turned to me. "We need a plan. We can't just walk into Miller's Field at midnight and hope for the best." "We need backup," I agreed. "Rob and Hernandez, at least. And weapons, silver bullets if we have them." Tanner snorted. "This isn't a werewolf movie, Ellsworth." "No, but we're dealing with something supernatural, something that can take a bullet to the chest and keep coming. We need every advantage we can get. We spent the rest of the day preparing. Tanner briefed Rob and Hernandez, telling them enough to get their cooperation without sending them into a panic. We gathered weapons, flashlights, radios. By the time dusk fell, we were as ready as we could be. Miller's field was bathed in moonlight as we approached, the tall grass silver in the pale glow. We spread out, moving silently toward the trees where we'd found the first body. Tanner and I took the lead, with Rob and Hernandez flanking us. The woods were unnaturally quiet, just as they had been before. No wildlife, no wind, as if the entire area was holding its breath, waiting. We reached the clearing where James Merrick's body had been found. In the center, illuminated by the moonlight filtering through the canopy, was a figure. Not the creature I'd seen before, but a man, tall, thin, with white hair that seemed to glow in the darkness. "Harlan Dawson," Tanner called, his voice steady despite the tension I could see in his shoulders. "Or whatever you are now." The figure turned, and I felt a chill run down my spine. His face was human, but wrong somehow, the proportions slightly off, the skin too pale, too tight over the bones. And his eyes, those same black, bottomless eyes I'd seen in the creature. "Sheriff Tanner," he said, his voice a dry rasp that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "Son of Robert, how fitting that you should be here at the end." "This ends tonight," Tanner said, raising his weapon. "No more killing." Harlan smiled, a terrible sight that revealed too many teeth, all sharp and pointed. "It ends when the debt is paid, when all those who tried to destroy me have paid with their blood, and the blood of their children." "They did what they had to do," I said, stepping forward. "You were killing people, using them for your experiments." His black eyes fixed on me. "Officer Ellsworth, the one who got away. Did you enjoy my message, the gift I left you? Why let me live? Why not kill me when you had the chance?" "Because you're special," he said, taking a step toward me. "You have the sight. You can see beyond the veil, into the place I've been, the place I'll take you." From the corner of my eye, I saw Tanner signal to Rob and Hernandez, who were circling around behind Harlan. I needed to keep him talking, distracted. "The journal," I said. "What was in it that you needed so badly?" "The ritual," Harlan hissed. "The one that will complete my transformation." Reverend Chen was more knowledgeable than the others. He understood the old ways, the paths between worlds. He recorded it all, thinking it would help them stop me, but it only showed me the way forward. As he spoke, his form seemed to shimmer, to blur at the edges. His human appearance was slipping, revealing glimpses of the creature beneath, the matted fur, the elongated limbs, the claws. "You're not human anymore," I said, trying to keep the fear from my voice. "What are you?" "I am become death," he said, his voice deepening, distorting. "I am the bridge between worlds, the first of a new species. And you, Officer Ellsworth, will be the second." He lunged forward with that impossible speed, but this time I was ready. I fired, the sound deafening in the quiet woods. The bullet hit him square in the chest, just as before. But this time he staggered. Tanner fired next, then Rob and Hernandez from behind. Harlan roared, a sound no human throat could make, and spun around, his form fully transformed now into the creature I'd seen in the woods. It moved with blinding speed, slashing at Rob with those terrible claws. Rob went down with a scream, blood spraying from his throat. Hernandez emptied his clip into the creature's back, but it barely slowed it down. "The medal!" I shouted to Tanner. "Use the medal!" I pulled out the St. Christopher medal I'd taken from Dr. Chen's house, holding it up like a shield. The creature hesitated, those black eyes fixed on the silver disc. "They used these to try to stop you before," I said, taking a step forward. "To bind you to this world, to keep you from crossing over completely." Harlan snarled, a sound that sent shivers down my spine. But he didn't advance. "The ritual," I continued, desperately trying to remember what Jenkins had said. "It failed, didn't it? That's why you're stuck between forms, not fully transformed. That's why you need the journal." "Give it to me," he growled, his voice barely comprehensible. "Give me the medal." I glanced at Tanner, who had circled around to Hernandez's side. Rob was motionless on the ground, his eyes staring sightlessly up at the canopy of trees. "Now!" I shouted, and threw the medal directly at the creature's face. As it reached up to catch it, Tanner and Hernandez opened fire again, emptying their weapons into its body. The creature staggered, black fluid seeping from dozens of wounds, but it didn't fall. Instead, it let out a terrible, triumphant laugh. "Fools," it rasped. "You've only made me stronger." It lunged at me, claws extended. I fired my last bullet, hitting it in the face. The impact knocked it back, giving me just enough time to dive out of the way, but as I rolled across the ground, I felt those claws rake across my back, tearing through jacket and flesh alike. The pain was blinding, but adrenaline kept me moving. I scrambled to my feet, drawing my knife, a pitiful weapon against such a creature, but all I had left. The creature was facing Tanner now, who had backed up against a tree, his empty gun still pointed at Harlan's chest. Hernandez was nowhere to be seen. "Your father failed," Harlan growled at Tanner. "Just as you have failed. The cycle ends tonight." As he raised his clawed hand to strike, I saw something move in the shadows behind him. Hernandez, his face pale with fear but determined. In his hand was something that glinted in the moonlight, not a weapon but a book. Dr. Chen's father's journal. Hernandez caught my eye, and I understood. He must have found it during the fight, discarded by Harlan in the chaos. "Harlan," I shouted. "It's not over yet." The creature turned, those black eyes finding me in the darkness. I held up my hand, as if I were holding something precious. "Looking for this?" I taunted, backing away slowly, drawing him away from Tanner. The creature snarled and lunged after me exactly as I'd hoped. As it passed Hernandez, the young officer stepped forward and shouted something. Words in a language I didn't recognize read from the pages of the journal. Harlan froze mid-stride, a terrible scream tearing from his throat. His body convulsed, shifting rapidly between human and creature forms, as if caught between worlds. Hernandez continued reading, his voice growing stronger with each word. The air in the clearing seemed to thicken, to vibrate with energy. The moonlight intensified, bathing everything in an unnatural silver glow. And then, with a sound like the tearing of reality itself, Harlan Dawson, or the thing he had become, simply disappeared. One moment he was there, writhing in apparent agony, and the next, gone. No flash of light, no dramatic explosion, just gone, as if he'd never existed. The silence that followed was deafening. I stood there, bleeding, staring at the empty space where the creature had been. Tanner slumped against the tree, his face ashen. Hernandez closed the journal with shaking hands. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked around the clearing, at Rob's lifeless body, at the blood-soaked ground, at the St. Christopher medal, now lying innocently in the grass where Harlan had stood. "I don't know," I answered honestly. "But I think he's gone. For now." The official report listed Rob's death as the result of a bear attack. The same bear that had killed James Merrick and Emily Lawson and critically injured Thomas Jenkins and Dr. Margaret Chen. The bear that had been shot and killed by Sheriff Tanner in Miller's Field that night, its body disposed of by animal control. A convenient story. A comforting lie. Dr. Chen recovered, though she walks with a limp now and rarely talks about what happened. Hernandez was promoted to detective, his role in ending the bear attacks commended by the town council. Tanner still serves as sheriff, though the events of that night seem to have aged him a decade. As for me, I left the force. Couldn't stomach the lies, the pretending. I still live in Stillwater. Couldn't bring myself to leave, somehow. I keep the St. Christopher medal with me always, a reminder of what happened, of what's really out there. Sometimes, on quiet nights when the moon is full, I think I see movement in the shadows. A flicker at the edge of my vision, gone when I turn to look. And I wonder if Harlan Dawson is really gone, or if he's just waiting, biding his time. Because the thing about small towns like Stillwater, nothing stays buried forever. And I've never liked Mondays. The forest whispers secrets at dusk. That's what my grandfather always told me when I was growing up on the reservation. I never truly understood what he meant until my 3rd month as a ranger at Blackwood National Forest. My name is Thomas Redfeather, and what I'm about to share with you happened last autumn, during a stretch of unusual disappearances in our park. October in northern Arizona brings a special kind of solitude to the wilderness. The tourists thin out as temperatures drop and the forest prepares for winter's embrace. I'd been assigned to the eastern quadrant of the park, a remote area where the mountains meet ancient tribal lands. This wasn't a coincidence. The park superintendent thought my Navajo heritage might help bridge relations with the neighboring tribal council. The first hint that something was wrong came when I found the deer. It was perfectly placed in the middle of the Crow's Ridge Trail, about 11 miles from the nearest access road. The severed head of a doe lay centered on the dirt path, neck cleanly cut, no blood spatter. The eyes, still glossy and unclouded, stared up at the swaying pines. No predator marks, no sign of scavengers having touched it. Just pristine, as if it had been placed there moments before. I've seen my share of animal remains. Bears leave messy kill sites. Mountain lions drag their prey up into trees or brush. This was surgical, deliberate. A message. I reported it over the radio, but when I described the scene, Carson, my supervisor, fell silent for several beats. "Pack it out if you can," he finally said, his voice oddly strained. "And Thomas, don't mention this in your official report." "What? Why not? Trust me on this. Just note that you found animal remains and disposed of them properly." I wanted to argue, but something in his tone stopped me. That night at the ranger cabin, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old wooden structure set my nerves on edge. I kept thinking about that deer head, those unblinking eyes. The next morning brought news of a missing hiker. James Calloway, 32, from Phoenix. His girlfriend reported that he'd gone for a short hike the previous afternoon and never returned to their campsite. Standard procedure kicked in. We organized search parties, called in the dogs. I was paired with Mike Roberts, a veteran ranger who'd worked Blackwood for nearly 20 years. As we hiked up toward Calloway's last known location, Mike kept glancing at me. "You okay? You seem tense." I hesitated before telling him about the deer head. His weathered face tightened. "Did you tell Carson?" "Yeah. He said to leave it out of my report." Mike nodded slowly. "Good, that's good. Listen, Thomas, how much do your people talk about the old ways, the old beliefs?" "Some. My grandfather was traditional." "Why?" He stopped walking, looking around carefully before speaking in a lower voice. "This isn't the first time we've found things like that, animals placed in weird ways, and it usually happens right before." "Before what?" "Before people go missing." A chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the October air. We continued in silence until we reached the search area. The dogs were already there, but something was wrong. These were experienced tracking hounds that had found lost hikers in blizzards and rainstorms. Today they whined and circled, refusing to pick up a trail. "It's like he just vanished," said the canine handler, frustration evident in her voice. As the search expanded throughout the day, I noticed Mike watching the tree line, his hand resting on his sidearm more often than normal. When I asked what he was looking for, he just shook his head. "Just stay alert. And whatever you do, don't go off alone." We didn't find James Calloway that day, or the next. By the third day, the search was scaled back to routine patrols. His girlfriend was inconsolable as she was escorted from the park, her questions left unanswered. That evening, Carson called a meeting of all rangers. The small conference room was unusually quiet as he stood at the front, his normally confident demeanor subdued. "As you all know, we have an ongoing missing persons case. What you don't know is that this is the fourth disappearance in this quadrant of the park in the past 2 years." Murmurs rippled through the room. The previous cases were kept quiet at the request of higher authorities. They don't want panic. They don't want rumors. "What aren't you telling us?" I asked, unable to contain myself. Carson's eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never expected from my tough supervisor: fear. "There are patterns to these disappearances. They always happen after," he hesitated, "after certain signs appear, like strategically placed animal remains, or strange tracks that don't match any known wildlife, or when the dogs can't pick up a scent," added Mike. Carson nodded. "We've been instructed to keep this contained, but I can't in good conscience send you out there without warning you to be extremely cautious." As the meeting ended, I lingered behind until only Carson remained. "There's something else, isn't there? Something about why you assigned me to the Eastern Quadrant." He sighed heavily. "Your grandfather was Joseph Redfeather, wasn't he?" I stiffened. "How did you know that?" He consulted with the Park Service back in the 90s. "About certain incidents." Carson pulled a folder from his desk. "Read this tonight, but tell no one." Back at my cabin, I opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were reports dating back decades, each describing disappearances with eerie similarities. Notes in the margins, some in my grandfather's handwriting, referred to something called the boundary lands and those who walk between. The final page contained a single paragraph in my grandfather's distinctive script. "The entity they call the skinwalker is not what they think. It is older, more dangerous. It guards boundaries not meant to be crossed. When the signs appear, no one should enter its territory alone. And if you hear your name called in the voice of someone you know, never, never answer." A knock at my door made me jump. I quickly closed the folder before opening it to find Mike standing there, his face grim. "There's something you need to see." Mike's truck bumped along the service road as the last light faded from the sky. Neither of us spoke much as we drove deeper into the eastern section of the park. The headlights carved a narrow tunnel through the darkness, and beyond their reach, the forest seemed to press in around us. "I shouldn't be showing you this," Mike finally said. "Carson would have my badge." "Showing me what?" "Something I found 3 years ago, after the second disappearance. I've never told anyone else." We turned onto an unmarked dirt track that wasn't on any of the park maps. After another mile, Mike stopped the truck and killed the engine. "We walk from here. Stay close." Armed with only flashlights, we moved through the underbrush. I followed Mike's lead, noticing how carefully he placed each step, how frequently he checked our surroundings. 20 minutes of hiking brought us to a small clearing. At its center stood a circle of stones, each about the size of a human head. "Look familiar?" Mike asked. I shook my head, but something about the arrangement set off alarms in my mind. "It's not on any archaeological survey," he continued. "I checked, and every time someone goes missing, I find it rearranged." He directed his flashlight to show that several of the stones had been moved recently, the disturbed earth still fresh. 4 stones moved, 4 disappearances. I approached the circle cautiously. "You think someone's using this too? What? Keep count?" "Not someone. Something." Mike's voice had dropped to a whisper. "The first time I found this place, I disturbed one of the stones. That night, something came to my cabin. A owl hooted nearby, making us both flinch." "What do you mean, came to your cabin?" Mike's flashlight beam trembled slightly. "It scratched at my windows, called my name in my wife's voice. She was in Phoenix visiting her sister at the time." The night seemed to grow colder as he spoke. "I remembered my grandfather's warning about hearing your name called." "Did you answer it?" "No. My grandmother was Hopi. She told me stories." He looked at me meaningfully. "I think your people have similar ones." I nodded slowly. The Yinal Delushi, the skinwalker, was not something discussed openly among the Navajo. It was a dark subject, a taboo. A witch who could transform into animals after committing terrible acts to gain power. "My grandfather's notes mentioned something guarding boundaries," I said. "Boundaries between what?" He didn't specify. A twig snapped in the darkness beyond our flashlight beams. We both whirled toward the sound. "We should go," Mike whispered. "We've been here too long." As we turned to leave, my flashlight caught something at the edge of the clearing. A footprint. But not human, not entirely. It resembled a bare human foot, but the toes were too long, the ball of the foot too wide. "Mike," I called softly, pointing. He came over, cursed under his breath. "Don't touch it. Don't go near it." "What makes a track like that?" "Nothing natural." He grabbed my arm. "Let's move. Now." We hurried back through the forest, every shadow seeming to reach for us, every sound amplified by our fear. Halfway to the truck, Mike stopped suddenly, raising his hand for silence. From somewhere ahead came the sound of movement, something large pushing through the underbrush. We killed our flashlights immediately, crouching in the darkness. The rustling grew closer. Through gaps in the trees, I caught glimpses of moonlight reflecting off something. Not fur, not quite skin. A shape moving with unnatural fluidity, too tall for a bear, too nimble for an elk. Mike's hand gripped my shoulder painfully. His breath came in short, controlled bursts as we waited, perfectly still. The shape paused, and I felt more than saw it turning in our direction. A scent reached us. Earth and decay and something metallic, like old blood. Then, impossibly, I heard my mother's voice. "Thomas? Thomas, help me." Every muscle in my body tensed to respond. It was her voice, exactly as I remembered it before cancer took her 3 years ago. For one irrational moment, I thought, "She's here, she needs me." Mike's grip tightened, his fingers digging into my shoulder, grounding me. The voice called again, more insistent, with a note of pain that tore at my heart. "Thomas, please, I'm hurt." I remained frozen, fighting every instinct. The shape moved again, closer to our position. In the dappled moonlight, I caught a glimpse of what appeared to be antlers, but wrong somehow, too many points, branching in impossible angles. For what seemed like an eternity, we remained motionless as the entity prowled nearby. Finally, it moved away, the sound of its passage fading into the distance. We didn't speak until we were back in Mike's truck, doors locked, engine running. "It knows you're here now," Mike said grimly. "It knows your weakness. My mother isn't here. That thing, it gets in your head somehow. Finds the voices that you can't resist." I stared out at the dark forest. What does it want? Territory maybe, or maybe it's just hungry. Mike put the truck in gear. "Either way, you need to request a transfer. Tomorrow." "I can't do that." "Why the hell not?" I thought of my grandfather's notes, of the missing hikers, of James Calloway who might still be out there somewhere. Because if it knows me now, I might be the best chance we have of stopping it. Mike's expression was grim. You can't stop it, Thomas. No one can. The best we can do is learn its patterns, avoid triggering it, and let it take people occasionally. That's your solution? It's been the Park Service's unofficial policy for longer than you know. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. How many people have gone missing over the years? Mike wouldn't meet my eyes. More than the official records show, we drove the rest of the way in silence. As Mike dropped me at my cabin, he rolled down his window. Lock your doors tonight. Don't answer if you hear anything, call your name. And Thomas, I'm sorry I brought you into this. Inside, I double-checked every lock, every window. I placed the folder with my grandfather's notes on the table and added my own observations about what we'd seen tonight. As I wrote, a new thought occurred to me. What if these disappearances weren't random? What if there was a pattern beyond the stone circle? I pulled out a map of the park and marked the locations of all known disappearances, including the 4 Mike had mentioned. Stepping back, I felt a chill run down my spine. The points formed a rough circle, with one section still incomplete. I was calculating where the next disappearance might occur when a sound froze me in place. Gentle scratching at my window, like branches in the wind. Except there was no wind tonight. I dimmed my lamp and waited. Listening, the scratching came again, more deliberate this time. Then, softly, I heard my name spoken in my mother's voice. Thomas? Let me in, son. I'm cold out here. I didn't sleep that night. The scratching continued intermittently until dawn, sometimes accompanied by my mother's voice, sometimes by sounds I couldn't identify, clicking, chittering noises that seemed almost like speech but in no language I recognized. When morning finally came, I was exhausted but resolute. I called Carson and requested to meet him privately before the day's briefing. In his office, I spread out the map with my markings. Look at this pattern. The disappearances form a circle, with one section still open. Carson studied it with a frown. And you think the next victim will be taken from somewhere in this area? I pointed to the incomplete section of the circle. We should focus our patrols there. He was silent for a long moment. These patterns, your grandfather mentioned them too, said the entity was creating some kind of boundary, a territory, I suggested. It's marking its hunting ground, maybe. Carson rubbed his face wearily. Mike told me about last night, about what you both saw. I tensed, expecting a reprimand, but Carson just looked tired. I should fire him for taking you out there. And for telling you about the unofficial policy. Why keep it secret? I demanded. People should know what they're walking into. And cause a panic? Get the park shut down? He shook his head. The higher-ups won't allow it. Besides, these incidents are rare. Decades can pass without a single one. Until now. 4 in 2 years. Yes. His face darkened. Something's changed. It's become more aggressive. The morning briefing was tense. Without explicitly revealing what we knew, Carson adjusted patrol routes to cover the area I'd identified. He paired me with Lisa Chen, a no-nonsense ranger with 5 years' experience at Blackwood. As we headed out, Lisa gave me a searching look. There's something weird about this reassignment. Carson doesn't usually change the rotation mid-week. I kept my expression neutral. Maybe he's trying different search patterns for the missing hiker. She didn't seem convinced but didn't press further. We spent the morning checking campgrounds and trails in our assigned sector, finding nothing unusual. After lunch, we ventured deeper into the forest, toward the area where I predicted the entity might strike next. The day was unseasonably warm, the forest quiet except for occasional birdsong. As we hiked, I found myself repeatedly scanning our surroundings, jumping at every snapped twig or rustling leaf. You're jumpy today, Lisa observed. Something happened I should know about. Before I could answer, our radios crackled to life. All units, we have a report of a lost child at Aspen Meadows Campground. 10-year-old boy, last seen approximately 30 minutes ago, wearing red jacket and blue jeans. My blood ran cold. Aspen Meadows was directly in the area I'd marked on the map. That's in our sector, Lisa said, already changing direction. We're about 2 miles out. We jogged through the forest, taking the most direct route to the campground. When we arrived, we found a frantic mother being interviewed by Mike. Several other rangers were already organizing a search perimeter. He was right here, the woman was saying, gesturing to a picnic table no more than 20 feet from her tent. I went to get something from the car, and when I came back, less than a minute later, he was gone. Did he say anything about going exploring? Mike asked gently. No, he knows better than to wander off. We've been camping since he was 4. Her voice broke. Please, you have to find him. Mike caught my eye over the woman's shoulder, his expression grim. He knew, as I did, that this fit the pattern perfectly. Lisa and I were assigned to search the eastern edge of the meadow, heading into the denser forest. As soon as we were out of earshot of the others, Lisa turned to me. Okay, what's going on? You and Mike and Carson are all acting strange, like you know something about these disappearances. I hesitated. Carson had ordered us to keep quiet, but Lisa deserved to know what we might be walking into. There's something in these woods, I said finally. Something dangerous that doesn't show up in the orientation manuals. I gave her a condensed version of what I'd learned. The pattern of disappearances, the stone circle, the entity that could mimic voices. To her credit, Lisa didn't dismiss me outright. If this is true, why isn't the Park Service warning people? Politics. Money. The usual reasons. She processed this, her expression hardening. So this boy could be taken by something that the authorities know about but won't acknowledge? Yes, that's fucked up, Thomas. I know. That's why I'm telling you now. We need to be extremely careful. We continued our search with renewed vigilance. The forest grew denser as we moved away from the meadow, the trees older and more gnarled. The light took on an odd quality, filtered through the thick canopy above. After an hour of methodical searching, we came across a child's footprint in a patch of soft earth. Lisa radioed our position, and soon other rangers were converging on our location. The prints continued for about 50 yards, then abruptly stopped, as if the boy had simply vanished mid-stride. The tracking dogs arrived, but, just as with James Calloway, they whined and circled, unable to pick up a scent. The search expanded outward from the last footprint, but as daylight began to fade, there was still no sign of the missing child. Carson made the difficult call to suspend the search until morning. The boy's mother had to be physically supported as she was led back to the campground, her anguished cries echoing through the trees. As the search teams dispersed, Mike pulled me aside. It happened exactly where you predicted. I nodded grimly. The pattern is holding. It's completing its territory. There's something else. Mike lowered his voice further. One of the campers reported seeing something strange early this morning, before the boy went missing. Said they saw a deer walking on its hind legs at the edge of the meadow. A chill ran through me. Did they tell anyone else? No. They thought they were hallucinating from some bad mushrooms they'd eaten. Didn't want to get in trouble. We need to go back to that stone circle tonight, I said. If the pattern holds, there will be another stone moved. Mike shook his head emphatically. No way. It's too dangerous after dark, especially now that it's taken someone. It'll be hunting. This might be our only chance to understand what we're dealing with, to find a way to stop it, or to get ourselves killed. Or worse. In the end, we compromised. We would go at first light, when the entity was likely to be less active. Neither of us said what we were both thinking, that by morning it might be too late for the missing boy. Back at my cabin, I pored over my grandfather's notes again, looking for anything that might help us. One passage caught my attention. The entity feeds on fear as much as flesh. It savors the terror of its prey, sometimes keeping them alive for days before the final consumption. The longer a victim survives, the more powerful the entity becomes. If this was true, there was a chance the boy was still alive. But it also meant he was suffering unimaginably. I was still reading when a knock came at my door. Cautiously I approached, gun drawn. Who is it? It's Lisa. Open up. I peered through the peephole to confirm before unlocking the door. Lisa stood there, her expression determined. I want in, she said without preamble. Whatever you and Mike are planning, I want to help. How did you? I've been a ranger for 5 years. I know when people are plotting something unofficial. Her eyes were hard. That boy is in my sector. That makes him my responsibility. I hesitated only briefly before stepping aside to let her in. We're going to a place Mike found, I explained. A stone circle that seems connected to the disappearances. When? First light tomorrow. Lisa nodded, taking a seat at my table. Then you'd better tell me everything you know. No more abbreviated versions. As I shared the full story, including my own encounter with the entity, Lisa's expression grew increasingly troubled. This thing, she said when I'd finished. You called it a skinwalker, but from your description it doesn't match the traditional Navajo legends. No, I agreed. My grandfather thought it was something older, something that the skinwalker stories might have been based on. A more ancient entity that guards boundaries between worlds, and now it's establishing a new boundary. But why? Why now? I had no answer for that. As Lisa prepared to leave, she paused at the door. Do you think we'll find the boy tomorrow? I don't know, I answered honestly, but I think he's still alive. and I think we might be his only chance. After she left, I tried to get some rest before our early morning expedition, but sleep proved elusive. Every sound from the forest outside seemed magnified. The hooting of owls, the rustling of nocturnal creatures, the creaking of branches, and underneath it all, so faint I might have imagined it, the distant sound of a child crying for help. Dawn broke with a heavy mist clinging to the forest floor. Mike, Lisa, and I met as planned, away from the ranger station to avoid questions. None of us had slept well. The weight of what we were about to do hung over us like the mist. We go in, we check the stones, we get out, Mike said firmly. No heroics, no explorations. Lisa and I nodded. We were all armed, standard issue sidearms plus Mike's hunting rifle. Not that any of us were confident weapons would work against what we were facing, but their presence was reassuring nonetheless. The forest was unnaturally quiet as we hiked. No birdsong, no squirrels chattering. Even the insects seemed subdued. The mist swirled around our ankles, occasionally forming shapes that disappeared when looked at directly. It knows we're coming, I murmured. Mike nodded grimly. It always knows. When we reached the clearing with the stone circle, my suspicions were confirmed. Another stone had been moved, aligned with the others that marked previous disappearances. The circle was nearly complete now. What happens when the last stone is moved? Lisa asked quietly. Nothing good, Mike replied. My guess? Its territory will be established, permanent, and then the real hunting begins. I approached the circle cautiously, studying the newly moved stone. Unlike the others, this one had something carved into it. Crude symbols that looked almost like writing. Have you seen these before? I called to Mike. He joined me, frowning. No. This is new. As we examined the stone, Lisa circled the perimeter of the clearing, alert for any sign of movement in the surrounding forest. Suddenly, she called out, "Guys, there's something here." We hurried over to find her pointing at a narrow gap between two ancient pines. What at first appeared to be shadow was actually an opening, a path leading deeper into the forest, in a direction none of us recognized from the park maps. That can't be right, Mike said, shaking his head. I've patrolled this section for years. There's no trail here. Yet there it was, a distinct path cutting through the underbrush. The mist seemed thicker along its course, obscuring what lay beyond the first few yards. This is where it took them, I said with sudden certainty. The missing people. They're down that path. Lisa unholstered her weapon. Then that's where we're going. Wait. Mike grabbed her arm. We need to call for backup first. And tell them what, she challenged. That we're following a magical path to find a monster? They'll think we're crazy. She's right, I said. We need to do this ourselves. But Mike, you should stay here. Make sure we can find our way back. He looked torn, but finally nodded. 2 hours. If you're not back, I'm calling everyone in. Explanations be damned. Lisa and I checked our weapons and gear one last time before stepping onto the path. The moment we crossed some invisible threshold, the sounds of the forest we knew faded entirely, replaced by different sounds, strange calls that resembled no animal I could identify, and a distant rhythmic thumping like a massive heartbeat. The mist thickened as we walked, limiting visibility to a few yards. The trees along the path were wrong somehow, too twisted, too ancient, with bark patterns I'd never seen before. Moss grew in geometric patterns rather than natural spreads. We're not in Blackwood anymore, Lisa whispered. At least, not the Blackwood we know. I nodded, remembering my grandfather's words about boundaries between worlds. Somehow we had crossed over into something else. A place that existed alongside our reality but separate from it. We continued in tense silence, weapons ready. The path descended gradually, winding between massive boulders covered in the same strange symbols we'd seen on the stone. After what seemed like hours but was probably only 20 minutes, we emerged into a larger clearing. At its center stood a structure that defied description, part cave, part nest, built into a hillside. Bones of various sizes were woven into its construction, some unmistakably human. A sound came from within, a soft whimpering that raised the hair on my neck. The boy, Lisa breathed. We approached cautiously, scanning for any sign of the entity. The entrance to the structure was low, requiring us to crouch. The smell hit us immediately, decay and something else, something alien and musty. Lisa clicked on her flashlight, revealing a tunnel that led deeper into the hillside. The whimpering grew louder. "Hello?" I called softly. "We're park rangers, we're here to help." The whimpering stopped abruptly, replaced by a hopeful voice. "Help? Please, please help me." It was a child's voice, but something about it felt wrong, too controlled, too precise. I signaled to Lisa to be cautious. "Are you alone?" I asked. A pause. No, there are others. Please hurry. Lisa and I exchanged glances. This could be a trap, but we couldn't take the chance that actual survivors were down there. We proceeded deeper into the tunnel, which opened into a larger chamber. Our flashlights revealed a nightmarish scene. Along the walls were cocoon-like structures made of some fibrous material, each containing a human form. Some moved slightly, others were still. Near the center of the chamber, not in a cocoon but tied with the same material, was a small figure in a red jacket, the missing boy. "Oh my God," Lisa gasped. We rushed to the boy, who appeared unconscious but alive. As I worked to free him, Lisa checked the cocoons, finding 5 people still living, including James Calloway. The others were too far gone, their bodies in various stages of decomposition. "We need to get them out now," Lisa said, her voice tight with controlled panic. As I lifted the boy, his eyes snapped open, completely black, with no whites or iris. He smiled, revealing teeth that were too sharp, too numerous. "You should not have come here, Thomas Redfeather," he said in a voice that was definitely not a child's. I dropped him in shock, scrambling backward. The boy's form rippled, features becoming fluid, limbs elongating. The other cocoons began to pulse and writhe. "It's a trap," I shouted to Lisa, who was already backing toward the entrance. "Run!" We fled through the tunnel as sounds of pursuit erupted behind us. Scrabbling claws, that chittering speech, and worst of all, human voices calling our names in tones of desperation. "Help us, Lisa! Don't leave us, Thomas!" It took every ounce of willpower to keep running, to not turn back for the people we'd come to save. We burst from the structure into the clearing, only to find our escape cut off. The entity stood on the path, fully revealed in daylight for the first time. It was vaguely humanoid, but wrong in every detail. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at impossible angles. Its skin shifted constantly, taking on textures of different animals, scales, fur, feathers. Atop its elongated head was a crown of antlers that branched and rebranched, forming a horrific halo. But worst of all was its face. Or rather, faces. Human features rippled across its countenance, each appearing briefly before being absorbed back into the shifting mass. I recognized some of them from missing persons reports. "You trespass," it said in a chorus of voices. "This is my domain now." Lisa raised her weapon and fired. The bullets struck the entity but seemed to pass through without effect, like shooting at smoke. It laughed. A terrible sound of many voices in discordant harmony. I remembered my grandfather's notes, his theories about what might harm such creatures. I reached into my pocket for the small leather pouch he'd given me years ago, which I'd taken to carrying out of habit. "Lisa, run for the boundary," I shouted. "I'll hold it off." "I'm not leaving you." "You have to. Someone needs to warn the others." The entity moved toward us with uncanny speed. I opened the pouch, and through its contents, a mixture of herbs, white ash, and crushed turquoise, directly at the creature. It shrieked as the mixture made contact, its form rippling more violently, parts of it seeming to dissolve. "Go!" I screamed at Lisa. This time she ran, sprinting for the path back to our world. The entity, partially recovered, looked between us, then chose to pursue her. I tackled it from behind, a foolhardy move born of desperation. The sensation was indescribable, like plunging into ice water and fire simultaneously. Its body wasn't solid, wasn't fully physical, but my interference gave Lisa the time she needed to reach the path and disappear into the mist. The entity rounded on me, fury emanating from it in palpable waves. "You cannot stop what has begun," it hissed. "The boundary is nearly complete. This world will be mine." "Not if I destroy your circle," I retorted, backing away. It laughed again. "The stones are merely symbols, human. The true circle is written in blood and bone and fear. Each taking strengthens it. And now you will be the next." It lunged for me. I dove aside, rolling toward the entrance of its lair. If I couldn't escape, perhaps I could still free the captives. I plunged back into the tunnel, hearing it pursue close behind. In the chamber, the cocoons were pulsing more frantically now. The boy, or what had appeared to be the boy, was nowhere to be seen. I ran to the nearest cocoon and tore at its fibrous covering, revealing James Calloway's face, his eyes wide with terror. "Help me," he gasped. I pulled him free as the entity entered the chamber. Its form seemed to fill the space, darkness spreading from it like ink in water. James could barely stand, but together we staggered toward a second tunnel I hadn't noticed before. Smaller, but potentially an escape route. The entity's roar shook the chamber as we fled deeper into the hillside. The tunnel narrowed, then began to ascend. Light appeared ahead, Not the weird filtered light of this twisted realm, but natural sunlight. We emerged on the side of a hill I recognized. Not where we had entered, but back in our world, less than a mile from Aspen Meadows campground. Behind us, the tunnel entrance collapsed in on itself, sealing the way back. James collapsed, his breathing labored. I radioed for emergency assistance, giving our location. Within minutes, a search team found us, including Mike and Carson. Medical personnel took James away on a stretcher. "Lisa?" I asked Mike urgently. "She made it back," he confirmed. "She's okay." Told us everything. Carson looked shaken. "We found the real boy," he said quietly, "hiding in a hollow tree not far from the campground. He said something chased him, but he got away." "The others," I insisted. "There are more people trapped in there. We have to go back." Mike and Carson exchanged glances. "The entrance is gone, Thomas," Mike said gently. "Lisa took us to where you both went in, but there's nothing there now, just solid forest." I didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew it was true. The boundary had shifted. The path was closed. In the days that followed, James Calloway recovered physically, though the psychological scars would take longer to heal. He confirmed what I had seen. People kept alive in cocoons, slowly being fed upon by the entity. Not just their bodies, but their fear, their desperation. The missing boy was reunited with his mother. Search parties found no trace of the other victims I'd seen in the chamber. The official reports listed them as missing, presumed dead due to exposure or animal attack. Carson called me to his office a week after the incident. On his desk was a transfer order with my name on it. "Effective immediately," he said. "The higher-ups think it's best." I knew what this was. Silencing, distancing. The Park Service protecting itself. "And if I refuse?" "Don't," he said, his expression grave. "This isn't just about liability, Thomas. That thing knows you now. It will hunt you specifically if you stay." I thought about arguing, but knew he was right. The entity had marked me. But leaving felt like surrender, like abandoning those still trapped in that other world. As if reading my thoughts, Carson added, "This isn't over. I've been in contact with others who know about these entities. There are people who've been studying them for decades, looking for ways to fight back." He slid a card across the desk. It had only a phone number, no name. "When you're settled at your new post, call this number. Tell them everything you saw. They've been waiting for someone like you, someone who's seen the other side and returned." I took the card, suddenly understanding. "My grandfather worked with them, didn't he?" Carson nodded. "He was one of their best. They think you might have inherited his sensitivity to these boundaries." That night, I stood on the porch of my cabin one last time, looking out at the forest I'd come to love. Somewhere beyond the trees, beyond reality as most people understood it, the entity continued its work, completing its circle, claiming its territory. I thought of the cocoons of the people still trapped. Of the entity's words, "The true circle is written in blood and bone and fear." My grandfather had fought this battle before me. Now it was my turn. The boundary had been drawn, but boundaries could be crossed. Boundaries could be broken. Next time, I would be prepared. In the distance, an owl hooted. 3 times, unnaturally rhythmic. A warning perhaps, or a challenge. "The forest whispers secrets at dusk," my grandfather had said. Now I understood. It whispers of boundaries, of crossings, of things that walk between worlds, and sometimes it whispers of how to fight back.